You're watching BCTV, Branford's community access station.
This is BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford.
I'll second that.
Get back to your seat. Right there comes to you.
Always grinding.
Oh, thank you.
Lisa.
Is this right?
Thank you, John.
Hey, Lisa, you passed me by. Thank you. No, is that the right one? Come on.
We're on camera.
Okay, we're going to get started. Board of Finance, Town of Branford, budgetary hearings, Monday, March 19th, 2018. And before we get started with the balance of the budget presentations, I would just like to provide an overview of the budget requirements, the requests that are before us. Total requirements of $113,034,993, which is $1,222,000 increase over the current budget, approximately a 1.1% request of additional expenditures. After accounting for $12.8 million in revenues, that equates to $100,223,000 in net to be raised from taxation, with an estimated grand list of $3.55 billion. That would equate to a mill rate of 28.88, or 0.4 of a mill increase from last year, or 1.4%. And again, the Board of Finance will conclude its hearings tonight. We'll have a meeting and workshop on Monday the 26th, at which time we'll recommend a budget to the RTM. We'll come back sometime in May to set the mill rate. So with that, we'll begin tonight's presentations with the Willoughby Wallace Memorial Library. And I'd ask presenters to please use the microphones, the handheld microphones when making your presentation. And anybody who wants to speak from the audience, if you could come up to the table as well, that would be helpful. Good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. For our presentation tonight, I wanted to note a few increases that we have at the library. Under our staffing, one thing that's not on the budget list is a 2% increase for our part-time staff, which is under library staff, and that would be an additional $1,175, bringing it to the total to $68,818 instead of $67,469.
So you're referring to the library staff line
Library
item
staff item.
that
Yes.
was not included in the budget?
The 2%, right, the 2% increase. Under the regular wages and salaries, one of the salaries the contract has not been negotiated as of yet. So that's an unknown. We do have a new expense this year. The Lion Consortium, which our library and Blackstone and most of the libraries along the shoreline are part of, decided to contract their own delivery system because the Connecticut State Library delivery system was not functioning and efficient and was having budgeting problems. So we went with our own delivery system, and we paid for it this past year out of our reserve funds, but for the upcoming year, the portion for Willoughby Wallace Library would be $1,266.
And where is that included?
That is under purchase, services, repairs, and maintenance.
Okay, got it.
So we didn't have that expense in the past. And then the other increase that we've added is for under other supplies. we added an additional $2,200, which is an estimate for a defibrillator from Tom Mahoney, the fire chief. We've talked about it the past few years about that there is no defibrillator available in Stony Creek, and the timing that it takes for an ambulance to get there. Bystander interference can really help save a life, and we've talked with the Stony Creek Association about their support and possibly financial support of putting one in at the library. So we've added an additional $2,200, which is an invoice I have, the cost of housing, installing it and buying the defibrillator. So that's adds an additional cost to our other supplies. And then our library automation has increased a little bit, and so I added an additional $300 for that.
So the total request is $236,732. Got the number now? 236,906. Okay.
906?
Adding the 2% for the part-time library staff.
236,906. Is that what you're calling it?
Yeah.
Okay. Questions from the board on the budget? Victor?
Was the state library, were they charging for the delivery service? Was there an item on here that's no longer appearing because they stopped doing it?
No, that they had part of the state library budget was for the delivery system.
So, okay, thank you.
Charlie?
This may seem like a funny question, but what do they deliver?
All of the library items that are requested from our patrons from another library, and
Oh.
then other libraries request ours. We have a sharing agreement with
Okay.
about the 30 libraries in the consortium, so the items go back and forth.
So one more question, though. You have all part-time employees?
I'm full-time, and there's a full-time administrative assistant, so there's 2 full-time, and the rest are all part-time staff.
Now, are these people going to be qualified to use the defibrillator?
No,
if
we'd
you
have
get
to
it?
have training. One of my staff members, who was a part-time staff member, the 2 of us went to a defibrillator training 2 years ago, I think, provided by the town. But we would have to have training, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Other questions? Good, Joe. And revenue estimated for next year is $8,600.
Yes.
Okay.
That's from passports, fines, and library fees when people use the rooms and pay a fee to use the room.
Right. Okay. Other questions? Questions from RTM members or members of the public? Okay, no capital items, so I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is James Blackstone Memorial Library, page 51. Total request, $1,418,946.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Board of Finance. Making our budget presentation tonight will be Karen Jensen and Kathy Oxalita, our finance manager. Before we start, I just want to again thank the Board of Finance and the entire town for supporting our capital renovation that will be starting hopefully very soon.
Okay, thanks.
And so with that, we are going into the year with some challenges, good challenges, because we do get to renovate the library. But we're very pleased that our overall increase is $19,703, and that's 1.22%. One thing that we need to address going forward next year is that our auditorium will be used as a swing space throughout the renovation project, so.
Say, Karen, I got a question.
Sure.
The budget book is showing a different number. Are you combining operating and capital? Your reduction?
I'm saying that the overall budget, including the library's contribution, is only $19,703.
Okay, your overall budget. Okay.
Overall, yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks.
you're welcome. So one of our issues is that the auditorium won't be available for rental income because it'll be used as swing space for the renovation. And we normally would have generated $15,000 from that rental. So to address the shortfall, we decided to balance it by reducing the purchase of new materials by the same amount, $15,000, just for this year. Also, we're requesting a salary increase of 2% for staff. Our health insurance line it represents a 10% increase based on the advice by the finance director, but to reduce the cost to the town, the employee's share will increase to 15%, and we've eliminated the open enrollment reserve, resulting in an overall 7% increase. And then finally, as Alice mentioned, the Lion Consortium has voted to contract with the delivery service. So all of the members have to pay a portion for that service. And ours is $5,000. So that's an increase to the technology line. And actually, we've also been able to decrease utility costs by $7,000. In 2013, we contracted with CL&P for a loan to install energy efficient lighting throughout the library. So our loan will be paid off in May, so we won't have those payments going forward. And that's all I have.
That's fine. Questions from the board? Charlie?
Listen, I noticed in your narrative, you said grants are estimated at 10,000, and even in your income, you mentioned that. Is that still realistic?
Yes, part of that figure is grants from the state library. It's reimbursement for Kinetic Card, so patrons from other towns that use our library are calculated and we get reimbursed for that. We also applied for a grant from the Guilford Savings Bank and the Alan Lewis Loeb Foundation for children's programs. So we usually get those grants.
Oh, okay. Listen, what is your endowment fund balance now? You know? I figured about 115, is that about right?
Our endowment
I mean, $1 million?
No, it's 2,487,000.
I'm sorry?
It's about 2.5 million.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, other questions on this budget? Questions from RTM members? Members of the public? I think we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is adult education, page 62. Welcome, Hamlet.
Good evening. Paul is unable to make it this evening, so I will be presenting his budget. And it's a pleasure to present this budget. It's very simple. This is the enrichment portion of the adult education. He's estimated $60,000 in revenues with expenses of $60,000. And again, this is the enrichment portion of the program. And just for the board to be aware of, we participate with other towns. We participate with North Branford, Guilford, and Clinton.
Great. Okay, questions on this? This is a self-funding budget. Questions?
So why do you think the bank services are so high? $4,000 for bank services?
I don't have an answer to that, Charlie,
Okay.
but I can
just wondered.
certainly
Seems
look
like
into that.
High.
It's,
Yeah, basically, sorry.
Basically, Charlie, a lot of those programs, they have people enroll by credit cards, so most of the bank services are related to the credit cards.
Yeah, okay.
You may recall a couple years ago, we switched bank accounts, so we had the Bank of America account come under ours to help save on bank services, because there was also other fees that were getting charged, because at one time it was with Wells Fargo.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, other questions on this budget? $60,000 self-funding. Questions from RTM members, members of the public? I think we're all set on that. Next is school-aged childcare, page 63.
Good evening.
Welcome.
So I'm also a self-funded budget as well. It's funded through parent fees for the programs. Currently this year, I'm going to be presenting a level-funded budget.
So the total request here is $665,250, showing revenues of approximately $670,000. Basically self-funded, reduction in regular salaries and wages. Other than that, there are no increases. Questions from the board? Charlie?
This is just kind of a curious question, but I noticed in 2016 and 17, the employee benefits were 25, and last year they were 80. Like, do you know why the jump?
Well, that must be an error.
What page is that?
Yeah, but
That would be the employee benefits line item.
Page 63.
Page 63. Catherine, any input on that?
No, that's the actual from 16, 17. That's what comes over from the Board of Education when they make their payroll requests to us.
I mean, so it actually went from 25 to 80?
Well, they have a budget of 80.
They have it budgeted, that doesn't mean they're gonna spend.
Right, so that's, but again, you'd have to provide, maybe just check that and get back to us, but
sure, absolutely.
the fact is it's self-funding. so
Yeah, I know it.
But-
I just wonder what the cause was.
That's a good
What the
question,
jump
why
was.
they're budgeting 80
We
and
can get
spending
back to
25.
that. I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, we don't necessarily, right, it's,
We can look into that.
yeah.
I'm good, Joe.
Okay. But if you, maybe get back to Catherine or Jim on that, they can pass that information along.
Sure.
So, okay. Other questions from the board? Victor?
Is there a fund balance? I noticed they referred to a fund balance on one of the line items, but
Yeah, there is, Victor. It's 495, 256 as of last year. Okay, other questions? Questions from RTM members? Peter, you got to come up?
You got one, Peter?
Yeah, I'm just curious because, back to the 25 to 80, but all your program seems to have probably shrunk. I don't know if that's because you were estimating revenue, again, 670 or 680 from year to year, but your actuals were far lower than that, not, 20% lower.
Right, it depends on what the needs of the programs are for the town, and that's how I estimate revenue, and if a program isn't needed, and then I don't end up running it, I have included that in the estimated revenue for the budget season, but that doesn't necessarily, then obviously I'm bringing it in, but then I'm not also paying for the staff to run the program and what,
You don't have the expenditure.
I don't have the expenditure then, right?
So it's number of participants, and it's all, is this 100% by tuition?
Yes.
100% funded? Okay. Other questions?
I have a question on the information that was provided for us to get an understanding of what the issues that you've had this year. And one of the things that it did affect me was really, I was questioning the roughly 4 out of every 10 students in Branford are considered a high-need student per the State Department of Education. Do you know how this is all calculated? And
I do, Lorraine. It's, the high needs is a definition that the State Department of Education gives to students that, one, either are eligible for the federal breakfast program. We're hovering at 27% of our population at that. It also, students that are learning to speak English, students that are eligible for ESOL services, as well as students that are eligible for services under IDEA, special education students. Our percentage is actually 37.8 of high needs for those 3 categories. So it's, I rounded that and I said about 4 out of 10 kids in our school district are categorized as being high needs. They're only counted one time if they're in any of those categories. We do have students that fall in both categories, and we have a few students that fall in all 3 categories.
I see. The other question I have regarding that is there any concentration by education? In other words, is there any way that we could be helping a student if they're showing up in first grade versus one that's ready to graduate? Is there any way to...
Well, the services that it's certainly when they show up when they arrive to us, the earlier that they arrive and the longer they are with us, the more success students have. The standardized testing data would show that, as well as our own internal assessments demonstrate that. But we do have systems in place, commonly referred to as response to intervention. And just because a student has high needs does not necessarily mean that they will need that level of intense intervention, but in many instances they do, because they're coming to school with a variety of needs that typically other students may not have.
Is there any way to address any of that on site?
We are addressing that on site.
And do you have special support people, or what is it?
We have interventionists in our schools that work with students. We also have instructional coaches that work with our teachers so that they are trained and supported in doing the instruction for students that have high needs, or essentially differentiated instruction. So we do have that in place, and we've been able to do that with what I would consider modest increases year over year, but yet we're still able to provide those level of supports for our students.
Thank you.
It's a challenge, though, Lorraine.
Yeah, I'd say.
It's clearly a challenge. And just to give you an idea, and this is really getting into the board's piece, but we had in 2010, when I first arrived here, our high needs population was around 28%. And every year I come before this body and I talk about changing needs in the school district. And our free and reduced count, our percentage at that time was 20%. We're hovering around 27%. We're not alone in our community. We're seeing that throughout the state, in many communities, that the need is becoming greater. And that's something that I spoke to Bob as well as Charlie when we met, just chit-chatting around the changes that we're experiencing. And our staff does a tremendous job in addressing and supporting our students. I still think that there's more that we can do, but certainly given the resources that we have, we do address those needs.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions with regards to the school-age childcare? If not, I think we're all set, Michelle. And we'll move on to the next presentation, which is the Board of Ed presentation and Board of Ed budget. which we have a separate attached budget.
All right, thank you, Joe. What you'll hear in a few minutes, and you've already seen it in your booklets, we're here to present our lowest budget that we've ever delivered, but still be responsive to the needs of our students by right-sizing based on decreasing enrollment. We are still able to maintain our class size at a reasonable level, sustain our current programs, including our extracurricular activities, and also, with our recent settlement of a couple of contracts over the last several months, meet our contractual obligations. And I'll now just turn it over to Hamlin. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. And again, I appreciate the opportunity for us to come before this body, because not only is it the request, but it's also an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we have as a school district that we are currently addressing, as well as some of the challenges that we see on the horizon. In my cover letter that Michael and I wrote, we outlined 6 major pieces to our budget request, and those are truly the highlights. And I'd like to go over those points individually. The first one being what we just talked about with Lorraine, that we have 4 out of every 10 students is considered a high-needs student in our district. That's important to keep in mind because you'll see that one of our priorities is to maintain reasonable class sizes. Because we have this type of need throughout the district, it's important to maintain our class sizes at a reasonable level, which they are, and we're greatly appreciative of that because it permits teachers to do the important work that they need to do. Secondly, the board just recently settled in the current year, and Mr. Imperato was involved in one of the negotiations. We settled 3 contracts. The teacher's contract for next year, the wages inclusive of any sort of step movement is 2.38% increase. The nurses was 2.0 general wage increase, and the custodial 2.5%. That's important to keep in mind because this budget that you have before you from the board, unlike last year where the budget was built on a reduction in special education cost, this year's budget is built on an actual reduction in headcount, certified headcount of 7 certified teaching positions are reduced in this budget. That permits our salary line, which is our biggest line, to actually be only increasing by 1.1%, even though we settled the contract at 2.38% for the following year. The board also looked at the benefits line, which is up 6.4%, and when you take into consideration workers' compensation, which is down 30%, then total benefits is, I want to say it's 5 point, Don, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say 5.4%, but I may be 5.35, you know. So I apologize, I didn't have that number in my head. But you can see that that is an area that we continue to look at to try to control cost to the best of our ability. And we continue to work with the town, Jim and Jamie and the town's leadership, and seeing whatever we can do in the out years to try to control those types of costs. The other pieces that I'd like to really bring, if you have the board's budget book in front of you, just to give you an idea, because this budget is built on primarily the reduction of FTEs. In FY15, if we can think that far back, we had 314.7 certified staff. We currently have, this budget calls for 298 certified staff. So that you can see it's almost a reduction in 17 certified teaching positions over the course of those fiscal years from 15 to 19. So we've been working as a board to try to right size that's primarily driven by enrollment. I've said that publicly, that our numbers are down. They are actually ever so slightly higher than what the enrollment study called for, and we see that leveling off right now. But we have been making those reductions over time, as opposed to years in FY11 when I first arrived here. We had to make a pretty dramatic reduction in staff. Many of you may remember that. So we've been able to do that over time. The other highlight in the budget, and I just want to bring it to your attention, is on the technology side. We are looking for some new equipment on technology, and that's an increase of $130,000. And that's on page 13 of the board's book. I want to make sure, just pausing just to make sure that you have an opportunity to see that if you have any questions regarding that. You know. And then as we continue on and we think about what the increase of the 1.95, and I recognize that in your budget book it's a 2% increase. We have it as a 1.95, but it's important to keep in mind, at least the board is very cognizant of this. Our major drivers, which is salaries, benefits, utilities, tuition, and transportation, we have worked to control salaries at the negotiation table, to keep wages competitive, fair, and attractive, so that we retain the quality staff that we have here in Branford. We have worked and partnered with the town on the energy efficiencies to gain savings in that aspect. We've also worked with our Director of Student Services, who I believe is in the audience. He and his staff have done a tremendous job in educating our students that have diversified and specialized needs here. So we have reaped the benefit, most importantly, that our children are educated in our town. And that also is happening at a savings. And that was what our budget was built on last year. And then in the horizon, as I said earlier, I see that benefits is something that we will also be able to tackle in the out years. And our transportation contract, Don, correct me if I'm wrong, next year is the last year of the contract.
Correct.
And so we typically engage the services of an outside consultant so that we can see whether we can compress and collapse any bus routes at a savings, and we give that as a task. So I anticipate that hopefully next year we will be able to control our transportation cost as well. And then, as I indicated earlier, enrollment is always something of a topic of interest in any community. The June count at 2016 was 3,063 students, and this is the students that were in our school district. This does not reflect all of the students that we are financially responsible for, because we have some students that we're financially responsible for that are not in that head count. But the current head count is 2,844, and that was current as of the time that I presented the budget. I want to say that was the 1 February count. The delta between June of 2016 and February 1st of 2018 is 219 students. So you can see that our enrollment has gone down, and I want to emphasize that point because we've adjusted our FTEs accordingly, while not degrading any sort of services that we provide to our students. And then in closing, our request is for $1,088,837, and that is a 1.95 increase. I do want to, just in page, our budget, in your town budget book on page 55, where it says the requested amount of 700 in special ed. I've spoken to Mr. Finch about that. Last year, as you know, it was somewhat of a unique year. There was special education costs that were put into our budget in the amount of $507,000, $899. That the special education reimbursement as well as placements, that is a number. That's a number that's capped, and I just want to make sure that the state has never reimbursed that at 100%. So we typically receive a little bit less than what we actually are entitled to. That's true of any municipality. The state has typically reimbursed that anywhere between 75 to 80%. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear with that piece. And that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Hamlet. A couple of questions before I ask the board here. So the total request is for $56,888,223. So that, as you stated, is an increase of $1,088,000, 1.95% increase. I'm looking on page 16, and just a couple questions on some of the line items there. The repair services, you're going from actual expenditures of $941 in fiscal 17, and the $637 for the projected for 19. Just maybe a comment on the ability to make that do, I guess, or pretty...
The reduction.
Substantial reduction. I'm looking at the difference between 17 and 19, not necessarily the current year.
I know that we have many of our repairs having to do with technology. We have trained and we've been certified in-house so that we can do certain repairs internally now that we no longer have to send out and be billed for. So we're getting some savings from that, and that's really developing the capacity internally of our staff.
Okay, thanks. And the subsidy, could you just provide an overview on that?
Certainly. And actually, I'm going to turn it over to Don, but essentially our food service program, has been running. We've been subsidizing the food service program, not that uncommon for a food service company to be running in the red. We have been told by the state, working with the state, that we need to go out to bid, and we are preparing the request for proposal to go out. And I'll turn it over with Don, and I don't know if he wants to add anything to that, but essentially that's a subsidy that we've been carrying, and we wanted to capture it budgetarily. We wanted to show it.
Gotcha. Thank you. Don?
So Hamlet was correct about that. We have run it at a deficit. We went out to bid 2 years ago for the food service management contract, and which was awarded to Chartwell's. They've done a sufficient job with respect to the quality of the food, but they've not grown the program the way they promised, and they had missed their financial targets significantly, and it's been a growing problem. So as Hamlet said, we've always subsidized this program, but we're subsidizing it to a greater extent and a growing extent. So the number that's in the budget now is that's approximately the projection of what our loss would be this year, absent a voluntary $15,000 contribution that Chartwell's has made to us this year. But nonetheless, the state is requiring us to go out to bid, and I think that's prudent.
So is that because of you have fixed costs, but you don't generate enough revenue, or how does the deficit get created?
It's a combination of factors. Revenue is certainly something that they had committed to expanding, and they didn't really deliver on that piece of it. And then, yeah, there are costs, there are labor costs and food costs and a management company fee as well. So my intention is with the new contract to structure it a little differently, rather than have a fixed management fee, have a per meal sold fee. So they have to make more money in order to earn more money. So I think that will serve us better.
So the contract makes us cover the deficit?
It's not the contract so much. That's the way school food service programs are structured. And when they provided their bid, they included a deficit, a not to exceed deficit, but in fact they have exceeded that deficit.
Okay. Questions from the board? Victor?
Hamlet, I noticed the worker comp is down by 30%. How was that accomplished? Was there a
Well, we have a little bit better of
Experience,
experience, a little bit better of experience, but Don can give you a little bit more of the details on that, and because I think it's Don and Jim, because it's really on the town side more, you know.
Yeah, it's a little more than an art than a science. Basically, what we do is we have a stewardship meeting once a year, and we go over like the loss runs. And what we've done historically with the Board of Ed is we've looked at the last 6 years, and we've taken an average, and then we use that and compare it to the town claims, and then we prorate some of the fixed fees. So the Board of Ed had some improved claims experience, and they've had some claims drop off. So when you look at the two together, I think you went from 3-something down to 233. I think 300 and change down to 233,000. So they've had some good experience recently, and so that translated it into a savings into their budget.
So you don't do an experience mod per se, right? Just
No.
dollars.
Correct. And I could get into that more when later in the night when we do our workers' comp. One of the things that I think probably the next move for us, because 2 years ago we put a large cash infusion into the fund, because over a period of time we saw the fund balance going down, and in doing that we kind of came up with our own sort of modified formula for doing loss development factors. But I think one of the things that we'll have to get to in the future, and some communities are starting to do this, is basically have a valuation of the workers' comp fund, because it is of a substantial size now, and we've done it with our other liabilities, which we have to, primarily OPEB and the pensions, but I think it would make sense to do it for workers' comp also.
Would that mean you would be developing a mod so you could compare it to other communities?
It's funny, because I've asked about that, because I know when we were fully insured, the mod was very helpful. So if our mod was 1 1/4, we pay 125% of what a normal experience would be. But my concern really is really two-front. One is to try to reduce losses, and that's sort of the risk avoidance, public safety end. And then the other is to make sure that it's adequately funded. And I think the valuation will do that. So we've also engaged a firm, USI. Myself, Don, and Jamie met with them probably 9 months ago, I think it was. And we actually, they're looking at our program too, to complement but not compete with our current provider. And they're also looking at our loss runs too, to look at the $1,090,000 and change plus the 233 that these guys have to see if that's adequate. But I think absent evaluation, I think that's really the next move there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Questions? Charlie?
Hamlet, this is for you.
Yes, Charlie.
On page 40, the enrollment, you said, I think I heard you say 2844. Now, that's exactly 42, which is the Chipman Early Years Center. Is the enrollment down by 42, or did you just overlook the 42 kids?
Sorry, Charlie, what page are you on?
Page 40.
In your question, I'm sorry, Charlie, I'm at the page now.
I thought I heard you say 2844 was the enrollment on February 1st.
That's correct.
It shows 2886. And if you subtract out the Chipman Early Years Center, then you get your number. So I just wonder
I just want
whether,
to double check my notes, Charlie.
okay.
Just want to check my math. It may not have included early years. Charlie, this much I always know. Every year you're going to stump me.
I never do, though.
Yeah, you know. It's, no, it's good. It keeps me very humble, Charlie. And it's, when we look at this, Charlie, it's, and Michael just very astutely just circled, the count is elementary, intermediate, and high school. It does not include the early years center on the number that I gave you of 2,844.
That's, okay,
Yeah.
so I assume that.
Yep.
But do we fund for them then?
Oh, yes, yes.
All right, so
yeah,
we do.
yeah. And as I said, it does not reflect, and I'm looking at a slide that I did for the Board of Education, which showed the enrollment at the elementary level, the intermediate level, as well as the high school. And then the footnote is that that number does not reflect all of the students that we're financially responsible for, which includes not only the early years, but also students outside of the district.
Okay, I have another one for you.
Okay, I hope I have an answer.
Page 5.
Okay.
On the property, why the big increase?
It's technology equipment. Yeah, this is technology, right? Yeah, that's on the technology piece. And if I had mentioned to you.
I mean, this is personal property?
It's, yes.
And those are all the iPads and things that are in there?
It's all part of our technology, and some of it is for switches, some switch gear. It's a variety of things, and I had called that out earlier, and I said that there was about $130,000 increase.
Yeah, on page 13, I think, it shows new equipment of 129 and replacement equipment of a negative 46,000. So the net is the 82. But the new equipment is in addition to technology? Because technology's got your own line item.
Yeah, but some of that equipment is, for instance, like our mowers, and some of the stuff that we don't necessarily put in capital that we need. If you look at our capital budget, and I'm happy to go into the detail of that, but that's new equipment that throughout the school district.
Okay. Other questions?
Page 30 shows it pretty well. That's the technology page. Page 30.
Okay.
So technology equipment is up by $117,000. And Hamlet's correct. The majority of that is for switches.
I see it, okay.
Right, so they're using the code new equipment for property as well as technology, correct?
In this instance, we have, well, let me get the detail on it.
Property is replacement equipment and new equipment.
Right. And under technology, it's switches.
Switch gear.
Right. Number 70, code 71 or whatever. Okay, Bob, you got a question?
Yeah, just an overall question on staffing. So we're reducing certified positions this year by 9. And so I'm just wondering on the overall, on the administrator side, have you looked at that? What's the level that we hit when we start reducing administrators? Have we done it in the past? And the same thing on the coaching staff?
Well, let me just respond in two parts, Bob. First of all, the reduction in the book calls for 9, but it's actually 7 FTEs. The 8th one is a position that was not filled this year, that we are not filling next year. So we're taking that as a reduction. It was not filled this year, and we're not going to fill it next year. So that's the 8th. And the 9th position was actually our certified athletic trainer, and that was a coding piece, because it said certified. That individual was in the certified line. That person was actually, we put it in the right bucket, which is in the non-certified, under the other. If you look at page 6, you'll see that
That increased to
that
9.5.
there's an adjustment there for that. Now, as far as the administrative reductions, we had, I want to say it's 3 years, might be 4, but we had, based on the new evaluation instrument that we were mandated to implement, we had very, very poor ratios of teacher to administrator ratios. We fleeted up with an assistant superintendent for a short duration where we had 2 to help with that model, to develop that model. And I went before this board and I said we would not keep that individual. We would actually reduce that position once the individual retired. That's exactly what we did. We've made that reduction. So we have done that. And as far as the coaching model, our coaches, I don't know if I brought that piece of paper with me. I don't think I did. I didn't. But our coaches, our coaching model is a model that is in year 3. We have a total, I want to say, of 18 coaches. I'm going to get the correct number for you. It's behind me in a folder. But the coaching model is the high level of support in year 3. The model is still developing. It's clearly connected to Lorraine's point that we have 18 coaches. Is that what I said, 18? Okay. I don't want Charlie to start questioning me. He's always on top of me with my numbers, you know. But to Lorraine's question around high needs students, our teachers need support with that. Our teachers need to be supported by peers. That is a high level professional development model. It's considered a highly effective model. We're in year 3 of implementing that, and we continue to implement that, and we continue to get better over time with that. So those are dollars very, very well spent. But I will tell you that we still have room to grow with the actual model itself and reaching what I would consider a level of fidelity where we see very even gains. We are seeing gains clearly with our students from those teachers that have availed themselves to that model, and I would anticipate that to continue in the out years.
Once they're in the system that way, they stay that way, correct?
That's not necessarily true, Lorraine. I mean, once we invest in a coach, we would hope that they remain in that type of a position. But there is a collective bargaining agreement. There is no stipulation in the agreement that says that they can't move. We like to think of it, if there is a movement, that we are once again developing the capacity of the teaching force. To me, as long as we keep them, because we are investing in them, just like we've invested in all of our teachers. And our retention rate is very, very high. I don't have that in front of me, but I can tell you when we have an opening here, we literally have hundreds of applicants for an opening. So Branford is a desirable community to teach in.
Charlie?
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned to me earlier that you have teachers that are ELLs, like English language learners?
Their students are English language learners.
Okay.
The teachers are teachers, they're TESOL teachers, teachers of English, English-speaking. Yeah, that's it. I'll be honest. Michael's whispering second language. The acronym escapes me, Charlie.
Okay, my question is...
It's the nervousness that you exude in me.
No, but my question is, how do you know what languages these non-English speaking students are bringing to the classroom?
Well, Charlie, they take, there's a home language survey, so there's a certain degree of disclosure, so we know, I believe last count we had 26 languages. It varies. I mean, it really does vary depending upon the students that we get in. That survey is given our teachers as well as our paraprofessionals. They do an exceptional job with our students. We have a very high rate of students that actually exit the program and then go on to do very, very well without being in the program, but they still provided support. So to answer your question directly, we rely on that information, and we also rely on the information of teachers developing relationships with the families and the outreach. The student does not necessarily speak their language in the classroom, per se. The student is acquiring English, and it's no different than when we acquired our first language. We weren't born speaking. It takes time for us to hear, to process, to learn, and then we start to really replicate sounds, and then we start to string sounds together to make words, and words to make sentences, and those sentences to convey thoughts. The same thing happens when you acquire a second language. The earlier we do it, the greater the likelihood that the student will master that language. It's very difficult to do that later in life. It's not impossible, but it is a little bit more difficult.
Thank you.
Okay. Question with regards to how you measure, let's say, academic performance, and you want to give us a highlight on some of the accomplishments?
Absolutely. Murphy School, there was a school of distinction. That's our third elementary school that's been rated as a school of distinction within 3 years. So all of our schools at the elementary level in the past 3 years have been rated number 1 out of 5, number 1 being a school of distinction. So all of our elementary schools have fallen into that category in the past 3 years, and the middle school and the high school are ranked number 2. So we continue to see that progress and that improvement with our schools and with our students.
So the ranking is compared to who or what?
State ranking.
State ranking?
Yeah, it's a state ranking. It's the state accountability measure.
So we're not number 1 or 2 in the state, but
That's a number.
Category?
Categorically, you're ranked in this school of distinction is typically the top 10% of the schools, you know, if you're in the 1 category.
Okay. Other questions from the board on the budget or other items, other questions? Questions from the RTM members? Frank, you have a question? You got to come up. Yep.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Frank Toohill from the RTM, First District. Question about school security. There's been a lot of calls to me from my constituents. They want to know what's being done. There's an $80,000 grant that the schools have, which they're going to use to hire a person to give, some ideas as to how to make each school as safe as possible. Question to the Board of Education, I mean, is there some thinking and plan in place in the future? I mean, do you think you're going to have to come back to the board to ask for, some grant or cash to put this in place? Or, I mean, what's your thoughts on that, please?
Well, just to clarify, the Board of Education received a comprehensive presentation on school safety and security last Wednesday. I certainly want to acknowledge that, given the recent events in Florida, everyone in every community is on pins and needles, and we certainly acknowledge that. The grant that we wrote, which was the 3rd round of the governor's school security grants, we were awarded $80,000. Those $80,000 are not targeted for any sort of review. That's something that the board I've told the board that I would follow up on that based on the board's direction, that we would be looking to have an independent audit of our schools, security audit of our schools. That's not what the $80,000 are targeted for. The $80,000 are targeted for a replacement of classroom door locks. We've done the inventory of that. That's a process. We now need to make sure that we purchase a product that is the right product, and not just something that is fly-by-night, but something that integrates into our overall security of our schools. So I just want to correct that point, Mr. Toohill, because I know the press is here.
Thank you.
And sometimes, we get confused with that. And we've been very consistent in saying that the $80,000 would be used for replacement of locks. And we've also been very consistent to say that we would be looking to retain a consultant to conduct a security audit of our schools. We continue to work with the fire department as well as the police department, and we have asked, and this budget does request a new security guard in our intermediate school. And given the recent events and where we currently are in the current year, we're looking to fill that position for the remainder of the year at Walsh Intermediate School. So that is something that's ongoing. And then we're also looking at potentially doing some capital projects to look at the foyers and the main entrance of some of our schools, so that once you get through the second door, you not necessarily have access to the entire school. We would work with first responders on that. There are standards that are set out for new schools, and we would hope that we can replicate that to the best of our ability if we're retrofitting any schools. Again, that's a process, and so that's the last part of Mr. Toohill's question, that we may, going through the town, at some point ask for additional funds to do that. But at this point, it would be premature to say we need funds, because we haven't done the assessment yet. And I think it's important to have an outside consultant do that assessment and tell us where can we continue to improve our school security, therefore making them safer.
Okay, thanks. Other questions from the public on the operating side of the budget? Yes, ma'am. Robin, I believe you want to come up and take a mic.
Hi, Robin Comey from the RTM 3rd District. You mentioned that you have 7 positions that you're going to get rid of, and I was just wondering if you had thoughts on which schools that's going to happen in, or which age levels that's going to happen in. And yeah, just because I noticed that the early years had a decreased number, and they have a higher ratio to, staff to child ratio, so I didn't know if, in what areas.
The reductions right now are scheduled and are projected to take place at the high school because if you look at enrollment in the bubble that we've adjusted for throughout the years, we are also looking at having a reduction potentially of 2 at the intermediate school and then 1 at the elementary level. A lot of that, it depends on retirements, resignations, any sort of relocations, any sort of leaves, and then of course the collective bargaining agreement, which we need to, there's certain personnel mechanisms in the collective bargaining agreement that we would need to adhere to. But to answer the representative's question directly, we anticipate that the majority of them will be at the high school, with the least of them occurring at the elementary, and then at the intermediate school being in the middle of the road. And it's 7 total.
Okay, Robin, follow up?
Yeah, I was noticing that you had the Family Resource Center as a line item. Do you count those children in your numbers, and how do you allocate? Is that a self-funded program as well, or is it total? It's totally grant funded, I guess, through the Family Resource Grant. But I'm wondering.
For enrollment purposes, the Family Resource Center's students are not in our enrollment count. Okay. That's a program count.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense to you? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions on the operating budget? Ma'am, if you could come up.
Is it the public's time to ask?
Yes,
Oh.
yes, ma'am.
So I have a few questions.
Could you just identify yourself?
My name is Celia Toche. My daughter is in 4th grade,
Okay,
and we own property on Palmer Road.
thanks.
So I have a few questions, and I've been to the most recent Board of Ed meetings, as you know. We've been discussing a lot of the safety concerns that students feel, oh my God, I don't feel safe. And there's a big community conversation going on about basic security and safety. And I know we addressed the issue of the locks, and I know we've just heard the response to the previous comment in terms of an assessment of the facilities. But I think a budget needs to be accommodated also for the training of the staff. I know that the Connecticut general statutes require a monthly drill at all the schools, and every third one has to be a lockdown drill. I also realize that we are not meeting those requirements, and so something will need to happen this current year and be anticipated in the budget for the next year about the drills, and if there's any cost implication to that, if we need to bring in first responders or additional training for the staff and the substitute teachers, we should probably start to accommodate that in this year's budget, rather than wait for some external assessment on the facilities, because the two kind of seem to be independent. I'm gonna run through my list of questions, if
You
that's
want-
okay.
Sure, and then you'll remember them, Hamlet? Okay.
And then we also discussed, I think Chairman Krause had a great idea in one of the meetings about offering an early retirement to the pool of staff, certified staff that was reaching that landmark. And the idea was that we would offer for them to remain on the health insurance plan as an incentive for early retirement and offset the number of positions that we eliminated that way. However, that health participation option would have some cost implication. So I'm wondering if the numbers or the elimination of the 7 positions still include that idea, or if we are saying we're eliminating 7 and we haven't really given that more thought. And then on page 44 of the budget, we were looking at the technology. And as somebody mentioned earlier, the largest increases is in the property, which appears to be the technology. Seems that we are buying 780 new devices between Chromebooks, iPads, and Chromebooks for the elementary schools. I'm just wondering, the numbers didn't seem to add up, because on page 44, if you add up all those totals, they seem to come up to 209,000, whereas the total at the top was 259. That was one question, and the other question was for the high school, where it's bring your own device, is 200 brand new devices, or are we trying to replace? I'm not sure how that bring your own device and the 200 for the high school worked out.
Celia, can you repeat the map portion of your question?
On page 44,
Right.
if you look at the top, it said 259,000 for,
Right.
and if you add up the line item totals, I got to the bottom, I got to 209,000. And then on the next page, there was a 9,000 item, which is still not 259. I might be off on that, but anyway, I just wanted to confirm those numbers. And then, so my last question has to do more with things that probably we can't anticipate, but we should be mindful of. The Branford demographics are changing. We are getting more high-needs community. And I'm concerned that as we look to a new vendor for the food service, the pressure to say each meal needs to produce a profit, or they need to be self-sufficient, it puts a lot of burden on these families that are food deficient, food deprived. We are sending so many backpacks home at the end of the week. We have so many kids on assisted lunch. I want us to be more mindful and careful about when we put a new contract out for the food service, not to put added burden on the disadvantaged families. And I think that was the end of my list.
Thank you. Hamlet, you want to address these
Sure,
four
sure.
questions?
I'm happy to. I'll take them in order. The first part of Celia's piece was a statement, but her question regarding the early retirement, just again, a point of clarification, it was John O'Connor, one of our board members, who spoke not on behalf of the board, but he was commenting during a board meeting that he would like the board to contemplate and look at an early retirement plan, particularly when it comes to medical insurance, to bridge the gap for retiring teachers up to age 65. An early retirement, anytime that the Board of Education structures an early retirement, we cannot cherry pick. We cannot say, here are the 7 teachers that are retiring, math teacher, science teacher, English teacher, and we don't get to cherry pick when we design the early retirement. We say we get to cap it by number, and then essentially by age, and then by years of service. Those are the 3 variables. So there is no guarantee that we would ever be able to structure it to actually address the reduction in force. That's not to say that the board is not contemplating it. Don has done some work with that, so it is still being considered. I believe that was Celia's question. Is the board still considering that? And the answer to that question is yes. But I want to be clear, it's not a 1-for-1. We can't structure that to save the 7 positions. That's not the way, it's not feasible to do that. The second piece, relative to page 44 on the capital, I did some quick math, and it looks like it's 269 as opposed to 259. So Celia is correct, and that appears to be a clerical error, which we can correct, and that's a clerical error of $10,000. I'd have to go back and double check that. And then on the third question, Celia, if you don't mind repeating the third question, because I was doing some math while you were speaking, and I didn't capture the entire question.
That was the question about the bring your own device.
Okay, thank you. Yep. And first of all, the high school is a bring your own device, meaning that students can, in fact, bring their own device. And Celia, I know, would really appreciate this because she's very much an advocate for families that perhaps have need. Not all students have a device that they can bring to school. So we do have a repository of devices that students can use at the high school to access digital media, whether it be a Chromebook or a PC. We have them in our media center. We also have labs. So in that regard, Celia, we have a hybrid at the high school. We have a combination of bring your own device, labs, as well as in the media center, which you've seen. We have pods there also.
Are the 200 devices new or replacing existing?
The 200 devices, this is a replacement cycle. This is a replacement cycle. There's no way in the world that we would be able to replace all of our technology at once, so it's staggered. And we typically redeploy something also, so if we will extend the lifespan of a device and redeploy that if we can. And because we have some internal capacity, we've been able to extend the life of some of our devices, end of life. And that was a savings that you saw earlier.
Then there was a question on the demographics, food service.
Yes, that question, what Mr. Neal was alluding to would have no impact on any family. That would be something that would be on the vendor, on the contractor. So I'm not quite sure I understand the model of how we maintain our program from a financial standpoint. No child would go without a meal, if that's what you're.
The question is about the intended subsidy. for the new vendor, and whether we would be strict about a self-sufficient program that we're going to hire, or whether there would be, for those families that can afford a new higher priced meal. We would want to carry some sort of subsidy or contingency for that, once you have a new vendor.
Well, I think that's, without getting into negotiation, I think we try to strike the right balance where we have, first and foremost, a program that the food is nutritional, I should say. It's appealing to our students. Students are accessing or eating the food, have ample time to eat the food. Nutrition and education go hand in hand, they're very closely related. And then, of course, the cost of that. If you look historically what we've done, we've pretty much have held our prices in this district. I think I've been here 8 years. I think we've only raised lunch prices twice. So we've been very cognizant of that.
So do you think there will be a subsidy included, or it seems that the way I read the numbers, we are making up the deficit from the Chartwells, but I don't see any new number to accommodate a future subsidy for next year. Am I not reading?
No, if you look at the budget, the dollars, the subsidy, that was the. It's
There's actually an increase of 65,000.
Right, it's increased.
As an expected
Yeah,
subsidy.
so I think that from a perspective of, and again, I don't want to necessarily,
give it away.
Exactly.
No, I just wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly.
No, I think it's a little bit clearer to you now, Celia, that we still have that.
Okay.
And as I said earlier, we did this so that we can appropriately account for it.
And also, the other question was on the lockdown drills and other training piece on security.
Well, I took that as a statement relative to the question. That we have professional development funds, which we believe are adequate to address any sort of training if we need it, as well as working with the police and fire. 3 years ago, I think, or maybe 4 years ago, we had a major tabletop exercise that both the police department as well as the board contributed to actually do that exercise, a real life scenario, and we got together and it's called the tabletop exercise, safety exercise.
So given the climate nationwide about talking about security, training, this sense of raising awareness, you don't think we will have a budget impact as we try to?
As I said earlier, we have ample professional development funds that if we find something that is appropriate, comes highly recommended. As you know from your own research, the security community is divided on the types of training that teachers should have. We have everything from arming teachers with helmets and flak jackets and weapons to not doing anything at all.
And the costs range from...
And there's costs.
Exactly.
And what we really need to continue to do is to be thoughtful, deliberate, responsive, and communicative as we try to reassure our community that our schools are safe, but there are certainly things that we can do to make them safer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I would just caution the board, too, when you start pursuing any early retirement type of model, to just work with Jim to make sure that all of the costs, post-employment, any type of...
Absolutely.
I know the state has backed away from any of their early retirements because there was not a net long-term savings on any of those programs. And they're finding that out based on both when they analyze their pensions in particular. So
absolutely, Jeff.
Thank you. So we have a question on the operating budget. Frank, you want to come up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was great to hear a little earlier that 3 of the elementary schools, all 3 of them are, scored as number 1. We're talking about, of course, Slang and Tisco, and also, So the question I have is there anything we can do to bring Walsh and the high school up from class 2 to class 1? I mean, what do we need to do, to bring them up? Thank you.
Well, My boss is to my left, and clearly, we want schools to be high-performing. Our schools are, all three of our elementary schools have reached that distinction. On the scale of 1 to 5 that the state has set out, our high school and our intermediate school are at number 2. Do we want to strive for number 1? Of course we do. But more importantly, we want to create students that demonstrated just the other day very eloquently at the high school and articulated their thoughts, their beliefs, their positions as very, very young adults on very, very important issues. That to me is much more important than an arbitrary distinction from the state. That doesn't mean that we are dismissive of it, but it does mean that that's not what we're aiming for. We're aiming to produce highly educated students that choose either college or career and that meet success in either one of those fields. And that to me is our number 1. Just last year alone, I don't know if this board knew, we had in Branford High School, we had 3, I'll say that again, 3 students appointed to service academies. It's almost unheard of.
Thank you. Other questions on the operating budget for the Board of Ed? Marcia? You need to pick up a mic and...
You said earlier, Hamlet, it's Marcia Chambers of the Branford Eagle. You said earlier that there would be a new security guard at Walsh.
What I said earlier was that with this budget that is before the Board of Finance includes an additional security guard for Walsh. Okay. And given the tenor of what's recently happened, we're looking to try to fill that position this year.
This year. And is there a security guard in each of the elementary and the high school?
There is no security guard at the elementary schools. The geography of the building and the layout of the buildings are distinctly different and much easier to control than the intermediate school and the high school. And the high school does have security guards.
Does have a security guard?
Yes, it has multiple security guards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, with no other questions on the operating side, we'll move to the capital. Capital request is on page C1, I believe, of your budget.
Starting with page 44, Joe.
That's fine. I think that's fine.
Actually, I think it's working from your document, so.
Yeah, why don't we work from your
budget? What page is it on that?
That's C1, so if you go to 46 on your operating is where it starts.
Okay.
I think they're the same thing in that.
46, or where?
It's C3. You're going to look back in your, the back of this budget, yeah.
I mean, 46 actually starts with the justification, and C1.
Pardon? On the operating budget? Okay. Fine. And your name is?
Yes, Greg Gerolman, Pheasant Lane in Branford, parent of a high school student. Couple of questions. One is that I heard it was either Mr. Kraus or Mr. Hernandez say the budget is decreasing. Maybe I heard that wrong. I looked at the summary, got a screenshot of it. It says the budget is increasing by 1.95%.
Correct.
So I'm wondering to Mr. Kraus or Mr. Hernandez, am I wrong about the increase? Or did I mishear about the statement?
I believe you misheard.
Okay.
We're asking for a 1.95 increase.
Okay, because I heard decrease. Okay. Second thing, Where are legal fees within the budget? Is that under purchase services or other?
Purchase services.
Okay. And how much went to legal fees for the previous year, and how much are budgeted for the future year?
We can get that back to you. No, I don't have that in front of me.
Okay. Is this a time to also make a statement to the board with regard to?
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, if I may, with regard to that information, Mr. Hernandez, let me give you a FOIA request, if I may, for that information with regard to the legal fees and the information thereof. Secondly, I just have to express some honest concern here as to a board that is seeing more and more people spend more money and go greater distance not to send their children to Branford Public Schools. And they're asking for 1.95% increase despite having less, if this were a business, less customers, if you will. With regard to how the board spends money, there was recently a situation where the superintendent was given a raise in spite of cost cutting. I looked at the internet. I also happen to be an executive recruiter. I've been in this executive search industry for 30 years. I'm looking at websites like salary.com, School Superintendents Association, and School Superintendents Association lists the average salary of a superintendent, $165,000 for an enrollment of 2,500 to 9,999. And the manner in which it was done, and the fact that the dollars seem out of whack. I got 3 different websites that talk about how superintendent salaries are substantially lower than Mr. Hernandez. I believe it's $193,000 and change. That kind of thought process, if you want to call it that, could lead one to believe that the money might not be being spent as prudently as should be or could be. In addition, I would say, in terms of summarizing the current sentiment from students, from parents, the confidence, the leadership exuding from the Board of Education, from on down, suffice to say, would not meet even modest expectations. There's a strong credibility gap, and my goal in coming up here was to get some specifics with regard to a couple of the questions that I asked, and also respectfully suggest that this board consider these things in terms of funding this board, because giving it more money when it's not necessarily exceeding expectations might not seem the best course of action. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Other questions or comments on the operating budget or Board of Ed in general? If not, we will move to the capital which is on C3 of the Board of Ed budget. C2, actually.
He wants to start on page 46.
Where are you starting, Hamlet? 46, that's where you want to go?
46.
Well, actually 43.
44, let's make up our mind here.
43, now Jim says.
Ay, ay, ay.
44 it is?
Somewhere. Yeah, start on capital.
Just, because we're on capital and silly, I just double checked, the number on the capital was, is 259, it's 259,000, not 269,000. So
it does add up?
That number is correct on page 44.
So you got an A on that.
Thank you.
It is 259 or 2?
It is 259.
Oh, my God.
It is 259, I just double checked it.
Okay.
And we'll start right there on page 44. The request, well, if I may, Mr. Mooney, I would just like to do a recap of the overall capital request, which is, the total request is for $968,120. And that is on the transmittal letter, and then that number is further broken down into dollars that we are requesting from the general fund, dollars that would be from debt and bonds and notes, and then dollars that are redesignated. We work very, very closely with Mr. Finch and the town's leadership, Mr. Cosgrove, to develop the capital budget. So I want to thank them for their assistance and their guidance in that process. So this is really a culmination of a collaboration between the town and the board. And those dollars, when I speak about these dollars, I do not break them into those three different categories. You only see those categories in the actual detail of the capital budget. We're looking for devices for grade 9. We are also looking for a request of 80 iPads. We are also looking to start replacing the LCD projectors that we've had, as well as doing a computer lab at Branford High School in the amount of $50,000. And then our Chromebooks, the Chromebook carts are charging carts. That's where the book is actually, the laptop is put there and it's charged there and it's stored there. So it's a secure charging station, if you will. So we have a combination of labs as well as devices that are issued to students. So that's, and that's the hybrid model. We are not asking for any network replacement upgrades. You saw that earlier, some switchgear that we have on the operating side. Office computers, replacement and upgrades in the amount of $10,000. We are not asking for any, I'm on page 45 now, we are not asking for any funds for output devices. And moving over to page 46, and this is where the heavy lifting is, or the big request. The replacement of the tennis courts at the high school. The condition of the tennis courts is starting to degrade. We've looked at that. We're looking to replace the tennis courts, repair them. The dugouts, the additional $30,000, this board and as well as the RTM approved $30,000, so this would be the second appropriation, and then we would have the total dollars, and that was for on the girls' side, and that was a Title IX issue that I spoke to about this time last year. We're looking for an architectural study of $15,000, the sports complex and the laboratories. Again, this is tied into security, not having necessarily people come into the building to go to the bathroom, but in the sports complex where there's an actual laboratory as well as a storage area right there on the, on one end of the football field where we can store things, as well as people, there's ADA compliant laboratory facilities there. And then on the locker rooms, it says boys' locker room renovation, but to be honest with you, it could be the girls or boys. Both locker rooms at the high school are in need of renovation, repair, and those were not done when the high school renovation was done. So those are ending life. And as anyone who's ever been in a locker room at a high school knows that those areas take a little bit of a beating. We try to stay on top of our students, our coaches, but nonetheless, they get a lot of use, a tremendous amount of use. System-wide grounds equipment for Mr. Carbone and his staff, who do a tremendous job with our grounds. Every year, we have brick and sidewalk repairs. You see that before school starts. Invariably, some of the products that we use eat away at some of the concrete, as well as just wear and tear. System-wide roofing repairs, we do have occasional leaks that don't require us to replace a roof, but do require us to repair a roof. And then the boiler replacement, and I'm not quite sure, I want to say that was a Tisco, but I'm not, sliding in and this is all outlined in the following pages in C1, C2, and C3. And again, working with the town, we've indicated the funding code so that your body would have an idea of what the funding stream would be for the request. And that's delineated on C1, C2, C3.
Thanks, Ken. Questions on the capital request of $968,120?
Yeah, I got one.
Charlie?
Hey, Hamlet, you know, I go through this fire code and ADA compliance, and things have to be repaired, say, within a few months, where you're in jeopardy. And I notice you have like $25,000 a year. Now, do you get some grace period or something to correct and meet compliance, or what?
Charlie, it depends. Typically, we work with the fire marshal. It's the fire marshal, and there is a Dr. Woody, I believe his name is. I'm not quite sure. I think that's his name from the state, the Title IX gentleman. The title, from the state perspective, we tend to get a little bit more latitude. For instance, the girls' press boxes, the press box, they tend to give us some latitude as long as they understand that we're making a good faith effort to address that. When it comes to fire code things or something that's not in compliance from a safety standpoint, very little grace time is given, and we have to make those repairs almost immediately. We typically do that at the start of the school year. That we do a walkthrough at the start of every school year with the fire marshal, a safety walkthrough to ensure that our emergency lighting is up to code, fire extinguishers, a slew of things. And again, we're not given much latitude with that. We need to do those repairs almost immediately.
Okay, so these aren't the fire hazards or OSHA hazards or anything like that?
OSHA would be for employees. These have more to do with the ADA and the safety and the fire marshal piece for our buildings.
Okay, thanks.
Questions on this?
Joe, I got one.
Jeff, go ahead.
Hamlet, regarding the locker room renovations, whether it be the boys or the girls, is that a complete renovation of one of those facilities or partial, and what does it entail?
That would be a complete renovation, so we would be taking out all of the lockers, potentially restructuring the flow, looking at the showers, looking at the entire locker room area to include the trainer's room.
Do you have an estimate on this?
I don't believe we do at this point.
So this is a guesstimate?
This is an educated guess based on recent work that we've done.
And
Happy to get one though, Jeff.
Well, I know you're going to need it, but I'm
Yeah,
just saying.
no,
so if you were to do one next year, the other would get done in 22, 23? Is that what the deal is?
Yes.
Okay. So the trick question here is, without looking at what you request, your 5-year plan last year, are there any new items for this year that weren't anticipated last year for this current fiscal year? Like, were the locker rooms included in your plan last year?
Yeah, it's, I'd have to go back and,
Yeah, I didn't pull the book, but I'm just thinking.
Yeah, understanding that you prefaced your question by saying it's trick, so I'm a little bit hesitant to answer.
It wasn't coming from Charlie.
No, and I appreciate that, but I realize that
Yeah.
it's
No,
expanded.
I didn't have last year's book in front of me, so I'm saying it's,
Yeah,
because you have a 5-year
We have-
plan.
We have
It
adjusted.
was. Okay.
Yeah, we have adjusted some of our priorities. We may have moved, if I recall correctly, and Jim has it.
Okay.
I think we may have moved the locker room up, and we may have moved the tennis court up.
Okay.
If my recollection serves me correct.
Fair enough. Okay. We could check our books, but I just didn't know if you know offhand, but thank you.
I have one more. Like, repair of the tennis courts, that's 25% of your total, capital, your request. What kind of shape are they in?
Well, Charlie, they're starting to, there's cracks. We will probably, again, I'm not an expert with this, but when I walked them in the fall, when I was out there, you can see that we're getting some variations, slight variations from frosting. So they need to be repaired. And that's I don't know when they were last touched. I can certainly look into that. And they do receive a fair amount of utilization from our students. They were just out there today, as a matter of fact, right before the snowstorm.
Are there any hazards on the courts?
No, they've not been deemed unserviceable, if you will, for lack of a better term. But I would hope that we would address that before it got to that point, and we would have to shut them down and have their home meets done somewhere else.
Thanks.
Is that a complete renovation?
As far as we put that down, is that we would, get right down to the base, if you will, very similar to what we did on the track.
Okay, other questions on capital? Bob, you good?
Yep.
Questions from RTM members? Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had one question.
Gotta stand up.
Thank you. Just a second, please. On page 44, almost at the very bottom of the page, it says, "This request includes the purchase of 500 Chromebooks." Is that correct? I just wanted to go over this whole total. So what you wanted to buy here, this amount, you're looking for 200 Chromebooks for BHS, correct? Grades 9 and 10? And then you want for Tisco, Sliney, and, excuse me, for the 3 elementary schools, you're looking for 80 iPads, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're looking for 30 LCD projectors?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're looking for, for 2 end-of-life, and then you're looking for...
Those are the computer labs.
Yeah, for the labs.
Yep.
And then you're asking for 10 Chromebooks?
Those are the carts.
Oh, the carts,
Those
that's
are the
right, I see
charging
that,
carts.
thank you.
No, that's okay. That's
And
fine.
then you're also asking at the end for 500 Chromebooks? Is that
Mhm.
correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr.
You read that right.
Okay, Peter, you had a question?
Yeah.
Just getting near the mic, I guess. Just looking at the out years on page C2, outdoor classroom, is that new speak for playground? Or like outdoor classroom?
Were you being sarcastic, Peter?
Well, no, I really don't know what it, I mean, every once in a while, when I was in school, we had class outside, we just sat on the grass and didn't really accomplish much of anything, but I think that teachers liked it even more than the students did.
Okay.
Which line item are you on?
What is that?
The work that we were doing with the outdoor classroom, and the model of that is the next generation science standards, is to afford students an opportunity to engage in the science curriculum and using the outdoors and having them extending the school to the outdoors. We've pushed that out simply because we are also looking in the out years to try to have dedicated science teachers at the elementary grade. There's different types of programs, and with the new standards, as Mr. Toohill said, he wants to be number one. We need to invest in order to do that, and even with that, it's not a guarantee, but some of these things clearly would help our students, particularly in the area of science, of getting them excited, exposed, and engaged in science instruction and science concepts, phenomenon, earlier than the intermediate school. So that's the connection to that.
Thank you. That sounds like a great program. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Other questions on the Capitol? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
All right. We're going to move on to cover a few more budgets. Page 49 is public celebration. Jim, you're going to cover that?
One more time. I guess to see about the same wrong answer.
Request of $29,068, increase of $973. Jim?
Yep. I'll just wait till they, I'm just gonna wait a second till they, oh, maybe, no, all right, never mind, I'll just go. Oh, okay, yes. A couple increases there. One is the 2% for the part-time and seasonal help, and then the other is for the, the patriotic observance. Just by way of recollection, we have the Memorial Day, the Veterans Day Parade, and we also order flags for the graves that, as well there. The other large item in that budget is the fireworks, which is fairly self-explanatory.
Thanks, Jim. Questions on this budget? $29,068. Charlie?
Hey, Jim, how often do we buy the grave marker flags?
The last time we ordered those was in December 2015.
All right, so you think it might be every 3 years or so?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I forget who's on the committee, but usually they look and they see it and they'll order them. So I think it's probably on the condition.
Okay, other questions on this budget? Questions from members of the RTM?
Joe, to answer your question, Dennis Flanagan, on the flags, we have an issue with the flags with Stony Creek Association. We did advise them that, we're not going to keep supplying them flags every time they have a parade. Traditionally, we put the flags out a week or two before Memorial Day and Veterans Day Parade, and then we take them down. But in the past, Stony Creek Association keeps the flags up all year, and they get beat up. So we did instruct them that, they're on their own. We're not going to keep replacing these flags down there.
Okay.
Victor, you have a question?
Yep. How much do we collect from the community for the fireworks, besides from the $15,000 we budget? Do we know?
I don't know, but I think if we could access, we might be able to access that for you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's only 1 year's worth because you might recall when we closed that bank account and then when they came into us, that was, the committee had a separate bank account. when we were looking at the bank accounts with tax IDs, we brought that in, we set up in a special revenue, so we'll see if we can.
Jeff, do you have the answer? It looked like you were about to answer that.
Oh, you
Well,
have the
it's-
answer? Go ahead.
It's 5,000 or less that we collect during the course. I mean, last year might have been a little bit better, but
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like 6,622.
yeah, last year was an increase.
All right.
Okay, other questions?
You're welcome.
So, any other questions on the patriotic public celebration, $29,068? RTM members? Okay, move on to the next budget. Branford Cable Television, page 27, request is $77,200, $1,000 increase in subcontracting. You covering that one, Jamie?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, the increase of $1,000 under subcontracting, that's to pay to have the meetings taped. We've added some meetings. The Elderly Service Commission was added this previous year, plus we've been adding another, some of the POCD meetings, some of the inland wetlands and planning and zoning meetings have been taped as well. If there's an item on there that has a large amount of public interest, so there's been an increase in meetings being taped.
So, to just point of reference, what meetings aren't covered, or are all the town meetings covered, or?
Well, currently, the land use ones are not covered. Planning and zoning, inland wetlands, ZBA, they are not taped. Although we do, planning and zoning has been using this room, so we do, this is BCTV's equipment, we pay for
Yeah.
a setup fee on that. But other than that, and some of the smaller commissions, and obviously, are not taped.
So
But the
the
ones that
land-
are RTM, Board of Selectmen,
Yeah.
Board of Finance, and the Police and Fire Commissions.
Right.
Those are the regular, and Elderly Service Commission.
So is that the commission's choice? Is that how that works?
Yeah, I would say, typically, it's the commission's choice. These are just the regular, the ones that have been.
Do we have a
historically
choice?
taped. I think there's actually a growing demand to have more of them taped,
Okay.
that we're hearing. This,
All right.
now that they're on Facebook Live, the demand is growing.
Wow. Okay.
And then your supplies we're holding flat, as well as the $2,000 a year donation that we've put in, I think, 2 years ago. And that is to, as you may recall, BCTV has been losing some funding, particularly because a lot of people are no longer subscribing through cable, which they would get a portion,
Right.
depending on the number of cable subscribers. That's what the fee that they get would flow into them. As more people go to satellite or cut the cord,
Right.
those revenues have decreased.
Fallen down,
Yeah.
which makes the subsidy less.
Right.
Okay. Questions on this budget? Questions from RTM members or general public on the cable TV budget? Okay, thanks, Jamie. Next is water assessment, page 65.
Yeah, there's nothing this year.
Nada.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a closeout year. Last year was a closeout year. Next is employee group insurance, page 57.
Okay, the employee group insurance consists of two major items there. There's the health insurance premiums, which is the funds that actually go into the self-insurance fund. The town is self-insured for medical benefits. And the other, the 795, is for the other post-employment benefit trust contribution. And essentially, the elements of that are, there's quite a few of them. And, we basically are funding the medical, the pharmacy, dental, dental fees, life insurance is in there. There is a one insured component for Plan F, that's the Medicare supplement plan. In addition, we have contributions into health savings accounts, which we have set up for a number of employees. And then there's the various components of the insurance program. So, for example, we have what's called an aggregate stop loss, and we have individual stop losses. And then we have all the various fees for administering the programs and the network access fees. Bless you. The process we typically go through, is in December, we sit down with our medical benefits consultant, both the town and the Board of Education, and they look at where we're trending, and they work with us on putting together these projections, and we typically rely on that, and we try to mirror some of the same components that they're using. So.
Thanks. So you're anticipating, this budget has got a request of $7,043,654. Increase is $364,898, 5.5% increase. I know we're going to talk later about some of the other particulars on this, but for now, this is what the request is. We have questions from Jim and the board on this budget. Charlie?
Hey, Jim, what do we pay up to and then the insurance takes over? Well, what's our ceiling?
I believe it is. I believe it's $150,000, but I'll double check that. You're talking about the individual stop loss.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'll double check it. If you didn't ask me, I could probably tell you. I believe it's $150,000, but I'll double check. And then the other is the aggregate stop loss, which is anything over 20% of expected claims.
Okay. Has the insurance gone up?
Is the insurance going up? Yeah, well, for example.
Not the insurance here, but the insurance for the override.
Yeah, like, for example, in the current year's budget, the individual stop loss was about $368,000.
Oh, yeah.
And it's $443,000 next year in that number.
Yeah.
The aggregate stop loss doesn't change much because, it's only when you exceed the 120%. So that goes from about $21,000 to about $22,000 and change. So most of the increase from an insurance perspective is in that individual stop loss.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions on the insurance budget? Health insurance budget? Questions from RTM members of the public? Okay, good for that. Municipal insurance, Jim, page 58.
Okay, there's a couple different categories here. For example, the property, auto, and general liability, that's for a variety of our facilities. It also includes law enforcement, general liability, even small bonds for employees, and employment practices, umbrella, and so it's a variety of, these are typically premiums that you pay as opposed to being self-insured. And, we've been increasing that account, every year, and based on some estimates from our insurance folks doing the projection, we're able to reduce that a little bit. And, there's still some money in there because we anticipate we'll probably, once some of these new facilities are online, like say, say in 28, I'm sorry, like say in December, you probably have the community house online, and then potentially the firehouse that you guys approved. So again, there's it's based on some estimates, and then putting a little extra in for anticipating it might go up in those areas.
Okay. And workers' comp?
Yeah, the workers' compensation program is, we touched on that a little bit. We have a self-insurance fund. The contributions typically come from the town and the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed last year was at 305 and change. They're down to 213 this year. And again, there's components with that as well. There's excess insurance. There's the actual agency fee. The actual claims incurred, second injury fund, et cetera. So the $1,090,102 is the town's portion. The board's putting in at $213,663. So we're basically putting in, roughly about 1.3 million into the fund for next year. And this is the one, again, Victor, where I said it would probably be useful to have a valuation at some point so we could kind of measure this because, especially with the development factors and stuff, so.
So the request here is $2,346,451, increase of $80,845. Questions on this budget? Questions from the RTM members of the public? Thanks, Jim. Next, pensions and contributions, page 56.
Okay, there's a couple areas here. One is the first one is the volunteer fire stipend. We've seen a decrease the last couple of years in the folks that are qualifying for a stipend. Doesn't mean they're not participating in the other folks, but there is levels that they have to meet to qualify. For example, we had 34 people qualify when the committee met last month. Social Security, pretty self-explanatory. The retirement municipal employees, everybody other than police are in the state MERS plan, and there's two different groups. There's the fire, and then there's everybody else. So this includes both fire and everybody else. You'll see the retirement for the police plan, and that is actually going up. A decent amount of that increase, it reflects the changes that we discussed with the actuary at the last meeting. You'll recall we're using a 6.5% return assumption. We tried to mute that a little bit with a 20-year amortization. We can take that down a little bit, and one way to take it down is to actually put more money into the fund, and that's something we could talk about later tonight. That's one of the things in the memo. Right. The other piece there is it's important to remember we really have two plans getting funded out of this. We have the defined benefit plan, which you'll recall when we met with the actuary, that's like $1,056,000. The rest of it is a defined contribution plan. And that plan, well, I should say the defined benefit plan closed in August 2011. So as folks are leaving, the new employees are going into the defined contribution plan, and that is a percent of payroll. So, that's going to eventually, grow as a percent of that contribution.
Thanks, Joe.
Then the other is the retirement volunteer fire. That plan is another plan that was presented on, and that number is pretty much very close to what the actuary had projected there. The other one says Retirement Board of Education. That was part of the TRB contribution that we split last year. Okay. As we adopted the budget, a lot of these elements were not known, and you'll recall we said that the best way to predict the future was to create it. So we basically built our plan around certain assumptions, and then we just moved forward. That was one of the things that we did. And then the other is unemployment compensation. I think that's fairly self-explanatory.
So it's a request of $4,684,318. Actually, a decrease mainly because of the TRB of $1,145,000. Questions on this?
I just want clarification from you, Jim. When we had that teacher's retirement fund of $2.7 million, I think we broke that up into the pension and debt?
Correct.
And this is the pension amount that we put into the pension?
Well, we didn't put it any place. It was a placeholder.
Okay, but it got in here?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, other questions? Questions from the RTM members of the public? Okay, thanks, Jim, on that one. Contingency, page 59. Request of $1,076,954.
Yeah, the contingency essentially is broken down in a couple different areas. We have contingency that's kind of for things that are unknown, and then we have things that we anticipate. You'll notice that the legal budget in aggregate stayed the same, but we know that there might be some actions that require more in legal fees. So, there is an element of contingency for that, as well as storms and unsettled contracts. And as it relates to the unsettled contracts, basically this if a contract is 2 years old, this just makes up the difference between the old year and the new year. It doesn't have that back year in there. The thinking on that is that if a contract is unsettled and the year closes, the money in the current year's contingency is going to flow back to fund balance. So rather than boost the contingency even more, to offset that, we probably would go back to fund balance if the contracts took that long to settle.
Gotcha. So you're anticipating some contracts to settle in this fiscal year?
Yeah, basically, we're hoping that they'll settle between now and the time that the budget's adopted, if not. So, for example, in other years, what we did, I think with the rec contract, and there was one other one I'm trying to remember, but because that settled before July 1st, we actually had the RTM transfer money from the contingency account to the salary accounts for those various contracts. So, I think, Public Works was the other one.
And so conceivably, you're saying that if the contracts don't settle by June 30th, that this number may not be sufficient?
Correct. It'll be the difference between the old salary and the new salary, but it's not going to have that retro
You're going to have the
from
retro
current year.
component, which is not in this piece.
Right.
Got it. Questions on contingency? Again, as we know, anything that comes out of contingency has to come before this board in the future. So this is a contingency. No questions? Questions from RTM members? Questions from the general public? Thanks, Jim. Debt service, P&I, if you want to take it together or separately.
Yeah, that's fine.
Page 53 and 54.
Okay, one of the things that I just want to point out, because it's a new line item, is you'll see utility loans, principal payments. When we approved the $6 million for the energy conservation efforts, there was a $500,000 zero-interest four-year loan for $500,000 that's offered through the utility program. So if we were to do that, that would be the, one quarter of the $500,000. So that's something that's new. This budget, for the most part, comports with what we talked about in advance of the library appropriation last December, with doing a bond issue in the fall, and then, having to make that semi-annual interest payment in this fiscal year.
Right.
Again, just kind of a brief overview. We know that our debt service will be, ramping up over the years. We have it built in a way that, we think we could make gradual increases. So we'd be going, from roughly 8 million and change up to 10 million and change. So you could kind of see over a period of years, how we're going to go up each year. And that was anticipated. That was planned. Back in 2015, when we did the refunding, we restructured our debt, and every time we do a new issue, we're looking at the existing payments, and we're trying to put together a plan that could best probably be characterized as logical and budget sensitive. yeah, you don't see huge spikes, so, so that's our goal. And the other goal is typically to keep debt service below, 8% of the budget. So that means 8 cents of every tax dollar goes to debt service. So I think if most American households had 8 cents of every dollar of earned income going towards their debts, we probably would have different consumer patterns. But nonetheless, that's where we're at, so.
Thanks, Jim. Again, the debt service ties to, as Jim mentioned, his December 15th memo that he updated the debt service plan that we all have copies of if you look in your emails. I just might note that back then you were pretty close on your estimated budget, 112 million, and you're off by a little bit, 113 million.
Well, yeah, and the other thing that's not in there is the utility payments and the issuance costs.
So that means we have to get down to 112 million before the end of this process in order to meet your expectations. Questions on Jim's budget? The total debts, principal and interest is $8,274,973, reduction of $1,428,000. Again, primarily because the TRB was in, I believe, the general purpose portion of the principal budget.
Yeah.
Questions from Jim?
Yeah, I'm sorry, there was one last thing. The interest on the new issue, it's just as in its own line item. Eventually, when the issue gets sold, I'll have to do transfers to allocate it towards those groups.
More, right, once you
for the
understand the
category
allocation.
schools, right.
Right, got it. Questions from the RTM members on the debt service budget or general public? Okay, thank you, Jim, on that. And I might, at this point, do you have a question? Yeah. Okay, so this would technically end the public hearing portion of our budget deliberations. So we also have one other agenda item, and that's a memo that came from Jim with regards to some budget considerations that discussed with the board, primarily around solid waste and medical benefits, debt plan, and police pension that may have some influence on our budget workshop, which is scheduled for next Monday, the 26th. Jim, turn it over to you.
Yes, and I know you have the memo in front of you, but for the folks at home, we all know over the last several budget cycles, we had a variety of fiscal uncertainties, and we were able to successfully navigate those by being responsive and flexible while working within constraints of the town charter and the state laws. So this year, is no exception, and there's a couple items that, while we may not be able to do this year, that they're going to have implications for future years. Some of these things probably could be accomplished in the current year. I think others will have a higher probability of success by waiting a year. But I think they're important as part of the overall budget discussion. And that, the first one is solid waste, and the Solid Waste Commission is here. The chairman of the Solid Waste Commission is here, along with Dan McGowan and their colleague from a company called Net Zero. No, I'm sorry, is it Net Zero? Yeah, Zero Waste, I'm sorry.
Waste Zero.
Waste Zero, sorry. And but they have something that they would like to present to you, and the reason I mention it is because when we think about the increases, and many of them were anticipated, but in terms of the $582,000 increase in the solid waste budget, there are opportunities to make some inroads into that and change the sort of the way that we operate in terms of our behavior and how we throw things out. Coincidentally, the Public Act 1494 is talking about statewide goals for trash diversion, and they're looking at, I believe it's in the 60s in terms of a trash diversion percentage, and I think we're in the 30s, and I think the program and the elements of which they're going to discuss will actually relate to ways to actually improve that.
So is that an unfunded mandate?
Well, actually, that's probably a good challenge question for these folks, because I think the fact that it's unfunded, folks will resort to other options and creative solutions to kind of deal with that. I think as these folks like to say that trash is probably one of the last utilities out there that you're not basically paying on or metered, if you will. And this is a way to kind of do that, but I don't want to preempt them and spoil their pitch, so I'll let them kick off. So
Thanks, Jim. Welcome.
Thank you for having us. I'm Paul Munoz, as the chairman of the Solid Waste Management Commission. We have Dan McGowan, the solid waste supervisor for the town. There's Kristen Brown from Waste Zero, a consultant to the Connecticut DEP. And I know that your time is limited, so I'd like to discuss with you just one matter, which does relate to the questions that have come up regarding the significant increase in solid waste management costs anticipated in this year's budget. We're here at the request of the First Selectman and the Finance Director. So the Solid Waste Management Commission began looking at ways to increase recycling and reduce our disposal costs. We began last spring or summer to look into this question. And we were assisted by DEP, and Waste Zero in that effort on a no-cost consulting basis program offered to the town by DEP. We have identified a way with some variations to accomplish the reductions that we want to achieve, both in terms of disposal cost control and achieving some recycling increases and disposal volume reductions that the state intends for communities to achieve over the next 6 years. These programs that we have looked at could produce, or if it were adopted, would produce a pathway to tax savings that would involve user-based expenses rather than general fund payment of disposal costs, which is kind of euphemistic. Potentially, you could think of it in terms of free pickup only, or saving money and reducing trash, an approach which could produce potentially $200,000 in annual savings. And we have about a 15-minute presentation printed out for the Board of Finance members and town officials. We're potentially prepared to present it on a screen if we can figure out how to do that. Or we can simply outline the program, describe it, answer questions, and reference a full presentation that we'll be doing at the Solid Waste Management Commission at our next meeting, which will be this week if it doesn't snow.
Yeah, maybe if we hand this to the handout and then maybe provide the high cut.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would work for tonight.
So my name's Kristen Brown. I am a consultant for DEEP. I'm in the third year of a 3-year contract, and they asked me to work on specifically educating and trying to move a few communities forward with something that they call Smart Waste Management. It stands for Save Money and Reduce Trash. I've been doing this specifically for 30 years. I've worked both in the United States and in Europe, and I've seen it hundreds of times move forward. It's a very cool, very fun program, but it is change, so it's a little bit different. But every time that it happens, that you get the exact same result, so that's what's fun about it. For me, that's why I keep doing it. But it's challenging. So I'll give you the high-level overview quick. So on page 2 here really is okay? Just really looking at the fact that you have, you collect trash for your single-family homes, you also offset the cost for your multifamily homes, and you pay the tip fee for both single-family and multifamily.
And I'll
A
just
little-
add to that and say,
Yeah.
so as you know, we have 3 things that we do within solid waste management. We collect trash, we collect recycling, well, 4 things. We dispose of trash at a trash-to-energy plant, and we sell the quality recyclables that we collect. This program affects the disposal only of trash at the trash-to-energy plant.
Got it.
Okay, and so then on page 3 of what you have there, tip costs are going up, not just all over the United States, but they're going up significantly in New England. As you probably are aware, you only have incineration left in New England for residential trash. Literally all of your landfills, only, other than in Rhode Island, which only has a couple of years left of life, everything goes to a waste-to-energy facility or incinerator. So you are sort of landlocked up here as the incineration capacity continues to decrease both in Connecticut and in Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire. Your only option is really to ship out of state or site new waste-to-energy or incineration facilities. So that's why you have a capacity shortage, because the capacity continues to decrease and we don't have much on the horizon coming in, depending on what happens in Hartford. So your costs are going up, but also in Branford specifically, your costs are going up this year for disposal about $10 a ton. You also have your collection contract for pickup in residential, which is also going up. So you do have some significant increases this year. Currently, you're at a 31% diversion rate. There is a goal for deep of 60% diversion. Go to the next page. And part of the reason for that is obviously environmental, but also to try to offset this capacity decrease that's happening in New England. The next page, which is page 5
So
here.
just the important thing on that 3rd page is that the capacity of the facilities is going down, and the costs to dispose of at those facilities is significantly increasing, and we're starting to see that.
Why is the capacity going down?
Age and efficiency of the plants.
Yeah, and then it's difficult to site new facilities. So for instance, your Wallingford facility just closed. Your Hartford facility, they're trying to decide if that will close or if it will be modified, or if another facility is going to be built on the property, it would likely have less capacity.
They're generally private entities, so if their maintenance costs continue to go up, this is what happened in Wallingford, you know, they really get a decision, do we stay open or do we, you know, stop? And if they stop, capacity for trash to energy is heading in the other way. I think Bridgeport is actually expanding, but we're not a member of Bridgeport.
Well, as you look at capacity in all of New England, there are many communities now that are shipping to Pennsylvania, Ohio, South Carolina. Some of the capacity in New England, Massachusetts is losing 2 waste-to-energy facilities. Maine just lost 1. So if we don't decrease the trash, obviously the cost goes up because you either, the demand goes up in-state, and then out-of-state you have the shipping costs to get it out of state, and then you're subject really to, if they have a tax coming in for out-of-state waste, you don't have any control of that. So it's, reducing your trash is really the best move as we move forward. You pay about $70 a ton for tip and transport. It's going up about another $10. There are, the SCARA communities are paying $84 a ton just for tip, not including transport. There are a couple municipalities in Massachusetts that are over $100 a ton, so it's not inconceivable that it will go up significantly. So if you look at your slide 5, the way that I like to compare apples to apples so you know where you are is per capita disposal. So the total you generate divided by the total of the population generating that trash.
So that's in the first bar chart? In the first bar chart, some of these lines across the bar chart?
Yeah, so it's this one. And if you look at this chart, you can see where you are compared to where some of the smart communities are. So you're at 669 pounds per capita.
And this would have shown up better in color.
And your smart communities throughout New England are at about 432 pounds per capita on average. and Stonington, which is a neighbor to you that does have a SMART program, is at 389 pounds per capita. So it's actually very easy to get there. You just need an incentive to get there.
And I will say, so, you know, our Solid Waste Management Commission, on behalf of the town, you know, we pat ourselves on the back and say, you know, Branford has one of the highest recycling rates in the state. But the important number is pounds of trash per person. And you get more bang for your buck by reducing the amount of trash per person in terms of your cost control. Because what you don't dispose of as trash, you increase your recycling. And we'll achieve our state goal, have no commodities to reimburse our general fund.
So just looking here, because this one's in color, you can see the bars. The red is recycling and the blue is trash. You can see when you move from a non-SMART program to a SMART program, your recycling goes up, but your overall trash generation goes down, which is really important as you contract in future years for moving these materials around. You're now going to be moving less materials, so people actually move more materials into their trash or into their recycling bins, but they also reduce, so they bring more to the Goodwill, they compost at home. They just think differently about everything that they throw away, so overall trash generation comes down by about 20%, and your overall waste will decrease by about 44%. And that means that overall cost decrease as well. So if you just go to the next one, which is, or
You skipped one.
this one? Okay, yeah, so how do you get to a SMART program? There are two distinct ways. You need to create some sort of a variable cost. You want to leave some of the fixed cost for trash in the tax base, but you want to create some kind of a variable cost so that residents are paying a little bit of the cost themselves. I usually recommend shifting the true cost of disposal, which in your case is about $700,000, shifting it into some sort of a user fee. You can do that in a container-based situation, and you can do it in a bag-based situation. Oh, question?
No.
Oh,
We've talked about bags.
yeah, so the bag-based scenario reduces trash a little bit more, and it's actually the most equitable for residents because you don't always generate the same amount of trash each week. And this way you pay as you go for what you use and what you actually dispose of.
So to the extent that Jim led off by saying that we are administering the last unmetered utility, this starts to put a meter on how much trash is produced relative to that 796 pounds per person, say, in the Northeast, or 669 per person in Branford. This puts a meter on that behavior.
And so this slide,
You pay for it now anyway. But
Right.
It's the same as, you know, if you keep your house warmer than I keep my house, we don't pay the same for heat. So.
yeah, so if you look at this slide, it sort of looks at different programs. And here is, I tried to design a program that would put you into the low end of per capita disposal. So if you look at this slide, this just looks at 2 of the bag sizes. You might have 3 or you might have 4. West Hartford is looking at 4 different bag sizes. So there are several communities in Connecticut that are looking at moving forward with this. But basically, you create a system whereby the bag itself, when a resident purchases that bag at the supermarket, they're purchasing the bag and the cost of the bag and the distribution, but they're also purchasing the estimated cost to dispose of the contents within the bag, so that they're throwing away basically what they use each week. And by having, say, 3 different bag sizes, you have an opportunity to buy, you know, a bag based on how much volume you're going to be generating. So if you have more people for the holidays, you might get the larger bag, but if it's just you and, you know, one other person in the house, you might get a really small bag, like an 8-gallon bag. And an 8-gallon bag would be priced at about 50 cents. So you'd have different options, but when you purchase your bag, you're actually paying for your waste. And when you do this, what's been interesting for me in my 30 years of experience is, when you do this, your trash drops literally, usually close to 50% every single time. The trash never goes back up. So it's this little small pinch that makes you think about what you're throwing away. So every time you open up a bag, you think about, oh, you know, I don't need to put those old shoes in there because I can bring those to the Goodwill. I recently did a waste sort in East East Hartford, and we found toasters, we found phones, we had found all these things that worked, but people, maybe it didn't match their kitchen, they didn't like it, they just throw it away. So this gives you the incentive to think a little bit differently about what you're throwing away, because every time you open up the bag, it costs you a little bit more than a normal bag, so you're thinking about it. So let's go on.
Do you anticipate larger volume of drop-offs at the transfer station, Saturdays, weekdays?
Bulky waste?
It probably shouldn't change, really.
Yeah, the number of mattresses and refrigerators and electronics potentially would increase, but, you know, I think for electronics, I think we get paid for electronics, so yeah, we'll take more computers. Today's discussion is a preliminary presentation, and a question like that is something that we need to hear in terms of how we evolve. If we go forward, what would be within the overall master program? It's a good question.
So if you look at this one here, you're looking at basically the program, you want to make it as simple as possible for residents. You want them to be able to get bags at any typical normal retailer, whether it's their favorite grocery store, whether it's CVS, whether it's Home Depot. You want to make them available to all, at all locations to make it easy and convenient for residents. If you look at the next one, which is just the financial, what happens individually, what's very interesting about this program is the average home in a program like this just uses one bag a week.
This slide is for you. This is the one you guys are, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, the average home will spend about $49 on trash bags. So you're shifting the cost of disposal out of the budget and onto the user, but it's not too prohibitive. It's just enough to help them think twice about everything that they throw away, and therefore the overall amount of trash that you generate will drop by 50%, close to 50%, and you'll be able to meet your diversion goals, and also you'll be able to, this way you're offsetting as those costs rise, as your tip fee rises. If you rise up to that, close to that $100 a ton, you're generating less trash, so those who are producing more of the trash are actually paying for the part that they're producing.
So to the extent that this is a matter to be brought to the Board of Finance, it's a transition, it's a cost shift potentially out of general fund and into household expenses, out of tax expenses for residents and residents. On the left-hand side of that drawing, baseline tax $153 plus $27. The $27 represents, based on 30 years of information and data collection by Waste Zero, the fact that in our part of the world, for what people do, the average house spends $27 a year on trash bags that they buy at the Stop and Shop or Big Y or various stores. In this approach, the cost of disposal of trash would be taken out of the general fund tax base and assigned in value to the cost of bags that would be bought commercially by households. There's a step that I don't think we have in the presentation, but those bags essentially would be sold under license by the town. And the income from those licensed bag sales would be returned to the town as revenue that we would add to the lowered tax amount we would done and use to pay the disposal commitment that we already have by contract for the trash that we collect and bring to the transfer station.
So for us, we'd bring it in as revenue in either a special fund or a general fund, and then we'd still budget the gross amount, whatever that is, but it'd be offset by some type of revenue stream.
Yes. So we would have a partially non-tax funded disposal cost commitment.
Right. Okay. And then you have the cost avoidance of the tipping fee. So the tipping fee, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and page 14 sort of shows that. Page 14, you can't see the color variation so well, but you can see the general tax fund is paying for the full amount here, and then here they're paying, the tax fund is still paying a portion of the cost for collection. And then the disposal cost is actually covered here through the savings and the revenue. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's essentially, it would be zero sum on disposal cost, but it would be lower disposal cost because we would see potentially a 44% reduction at full implementation of the program in the amount that we send to the trash energy plant.
Got it.
Yeah, and so the slide 15 is looking at residentially. If you did this on only to the residential single-family homes, what the net would look like. So you'd have bag revenue of about $300,000, and you'd have net tip savings of about $200,000. So the total benefit's about $500,000. If you add in the condo complexes, then it's about $750,000 net.
The term net program impact on that slide,
It's maybe not the best.
it's kind
way
of
to say it.
deceptive, not intentionally deceptive, but the savings and tipping fees in the middle row is really what we can talk about. The net program impact partially is the revenue that we hold
Right.
on to for 5 minutes.
Right, exactly, right. And so slide 17 is just sort of your environmental impact slide. To put it into perspective, it's really the single greatest thing you can do to reduce carbon emissions globally. I just had to testify in Washington, D.C., and if Washington, D.C. moved to this program, they would, and you would probably be similar, it would offset all of their fleet vehicles, all police, fire, and trash. It would offset all of their streetlights, and it would offset all of the district employee commutes into the city. So it is a huge global carbon reduction. I don't know how to compare it to your inventory here, but and so that's basically, the last one is just a summary of both commercial, or multifamily rather, and single family, the net savings.
So how many bags come in the box?
You do that, you figure it out how you
However
want
many
it,
you
but
want.
generally, I recommend 5 of the large. That way it's not too cost prohibitive for someone to buy a pack of 5, and 10 of the small.
Oh, so you just pick these out individually rather than...
Yeah, you get 1 pack of 5, or you could get 5 packs of 5. But in general, the average home only uses 1 bag a week, so you don't need very many. It's really an amazing mental change once you move into a program like this.
Charlie?
If I go to one of your charts here, I need a little clarification here. Where is it? On page 12. Up at the top, you know, the pictures? I mean, I now go to the store and I buy these 20-gallon black plastic bags. And I pack the trash in there, and then I put it in my, 30-gallon container or whatever it is.
Yes.
So instead of paying Stop and Shop for the bags, I'm going to pay the town.
You're still going to buy them at Stop and Shop.
You're still going to buy them at Stop and Shop.
So you're buying them at Stop and Shop. Stop and Shop is going to buy them
Instead
from
of
a bag.
paying the money to them, I'm paying the money to the town.
Yes.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. Why am I generating less?
Because you're paying a little bit more than you would for your black regular bag.
Yeah.
Mentally, I don't know what it is, but whether you're in Zurich, Switzerland, no matter where you are in the world,
I'm compressing it more.
reduce your trash.
Let me add to that. Let me add to that, though, because
You compress more in there for sure, but you actually generate less
It's an
as well.
important question, and it's kind of the same question the first selectman had. You know, it's a very good question. I think that you asking that question, it sounds like you have some consideration for already acting on the need to recycle. So the question is there enough change, enough benefit by going through this whole process and doing this program, we're actually going to see some reduction in trash? And are we going to see a reduction in recycling? If I'm already doing it, how much better can I do? So, you know, if there's a bell curve, there's a bunch of people who are kind of doing it, there's a bunch of people who are doing it, recycling, and there's a bunch of people who are really recycling. So, you know, we've got to get in the middle of that curve where the juice is worth the squeeze to you know, get the recycling curve to bend. And it's gonna, you know, you have an awareness of it already. I think it's more of a program to increase awareness, have a little bit of pinch. I think I just read the book that indicated that at like 75 cents, people actually start to notice what things cost. So if a bag costs $1.25, the potential consideration for thinking about what you're going to put in it might actually register.
There's another couple of things, how are you gonna police Stop and Shop to know what they're really, what the people are really buying?
So yeah, you don't have to worry about policing Stop and Shop because that can be done really through barcodes. So they would order from your vendor.
Okay, okay, through the barcode.
Yeah, you'll be able, they're tracking.
Half
everything.
of Massachusetts already does this.
Okay, I gotta, this is kind of, it's related, but, it's kind of unrelated. I thought the reason for the increase was primarily due to the one bid we got. The pickup, the collection.
Well, let me tell you, the condition we're in right now is, we got one bid. We had, as I said, we had 6 people show up for the pre-bid and only one person turned in a bid. One piece of information I could have given you last week is if we looked back 5 years ago, when the prior curbside collection contract ended and we entered into a new contract at what was a concerningly low number at the time, 5 years ago. The concerningly low number sustained itself as a less concerningly low number through each of those 5 years, to the point where the contract ended. Our current service provider has given us a potentially a $350,000 round number increase. If we looked back at the competing bids from 5 years ago, and we looked at our current service provider at the time, 5 years ago, and his bid, which lost, his pricing, if he had won, in the year that just ended, was barely $100,000 less than the bid we just got. So we've had an artificially low number for curbside collection during this current contract with its 2 one-year extensions.
Okay.
It's a lot of
Yeah, so if I look at recycling, so recycling's gonna go up, so our most profitable, I'm gonna think, is probably paper, cardboard.
Yes.
At this point, glass is probably the lesser of
It's
the
a
cost,
cost,
right?
yeah,
It's a cost to us. So where is the offset there? What do you think we're gonna do as far as bringing?
We just got our commodity bids in Friday. We haven't really looked at it yet, but regardless, we have to increase recycling, or we, not under an unfunded mandate, but, to participate in the overall intentions of the DEP, we need to be aiming towards increasing our recycling. And whether we increase our recycling or not, our disposal costs are going up and will continue to go up.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just wondering where we could profit a little bit more to take that offset off.
And we would.
The backside.
We would produce more recycling and make more revenue off of that increased recycling.
There are, as I mentioned when I first started, there are, some variations to this program that we still need to look at, potentially with respect to the condominium residences in town and what's going on with recycling in those entities, and how that would be reflected in the final program that we.
Right, because we're paying those tipping fees, right?
You're paying the tip fees.
Yeah.
But you don't get the recycling, right?
So I think we brought this to you at the First Selectman and Finance Director's request as a way to express the fact that we're seeking to mitigate some of these potential increases.
We appreciate it.
It could be a cultural change.
Okay, other questions on this presentation? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Good night. Okay, you want to touch on medical benefits, Jim? presentation here?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably easier for us to sit together because the three of us, along with Don Neal from the Board of Ed and Anthony Buono, the Assistant Superintendent, have been working with this. And yeah, we wanted to talk to you about medical benefits. And as I said earlier, that the town of Branford is self-insured for medical benefits, and both the town and the Board of Education work together with the same consultant, and you know, they rely on the projections of our consultant Lockton, and they make contributions which you fund through the budget to the self-insurance fund based on those projections. And usually we're funding anticipated claims with usually a small margin. I think in the Board of Ed's case, I think you said it was 101%. And those benefits are really driven by our collective bargaining agreements. And with the teacher's contract, there was a side agreement that talked about looking at other plans. And so, and they shared that with the town, and generally we're open to items that'll save money, as you can see from the last presentation. And so when we ended up meeting in January with our consultant, one of the things we wanted to take a look at was the state of Connecticut's partnership plan. And talking with some of my colleagues on the municipal side, some communities are going to this, and they found that they could actually save money. And so we basically had our consultants look at it, and we were able to save considerable dollars. And one of the benefits of that, obviously, is that one, we're saving money, but two, it doesn't affect Board of Ed programs. It doesn't affect the way we provide police and fire services. So anytime you can save money without affecting town services, that's deemed to be a good thing. One of the other aspects of this, and we were excited about trying to bring this forward, is that it gives us an opportunity to make other changes. For one, we talked about our debt planning going from $8 million to a little over $10 million a year. If we can take some of the savings from something like this, we could actually ramp up our debt payments in a way so that they offset, and then going forward the increase is even smaller. So let's say if you were going from 8 to 10 and change over a 7-year period, if you can do that over a much shorter period, it's actually better. Some of the other implications of something like this, I talked about OPEB. You may wonder what's the connection there. Well, if we were to move to a program like this, one of the questions that's left is, well, what happens to the medical self-insurance fund? If you're not providing self-insurance, what do you need this fund for? And one of the elements of this is that we would, in working with our auditors, is we would look to keep that fund. Right now it functions as an internal service fund. That means it's providing a service to other funds. If we were to go to the partnership program, we would look to separate the dental piece so that we could still operate the self-insurance fund. We could take some of the dollars from the self-insurance fund, we could apply that to our OPEB liability. In doing that, we could dramatically raise our OPEB funding ratio, and also reduce the annual contributions that the town and the Board of Ed make. So tonight, I think it was $795,000 for the town budget, and I believe the Board of Ed's budget has $426,000 for OPEB benefits. So, sounds like a good idea. What's the catch, right? Well, the catch is that, and if I was to, I guess I'll do a mea culpa here, is that, I'm the type of person when I see something that sounds like a good idea, I get excited about it, and I say, well, why can't we do this? And I think Jamie feels the same way, and I know Hamlet was excited about the opportunity as well. However, we don't operate in a vacuum. We have staffs, we have employees, and so therefore it's not as simple as I said in my letter, as turning a switch. You know, I was hoping we could turn a switch, and if we could turn a switch, we could incorporate some of that savings into our into the budget process, and that was the original intent in scheduling this meeting. However, you know, as life teaches us that you know, sometimes delays are not denials, and you know, looking at this, we are continue to work hard on this to make this happen. We've had some informal conversations with our collective bargaining units. Hamlet has done the same. The Board of Ed is also working with the State Department of Education, because this could have implications for the statutes that require minimum budget requirements. So they're having conversations on that end. We're having conversations about that. And we also have to comply with the requirements of the audit, where, as I said before, in terms of you know, essentially maintaining that self-insurance fund. There are, I don't profess to know all of them, but I know that the GASB 54 talked about fund balance, and you can't just put money in a fund if it's not actually providing a function. So, so going forward, however, we are going to be working with our collective bargaining agreements. We've encouraged the folks we've talked to, we've encouraged them to research the partnership plan. We've encouraged them to contact their reps. I mean, we you know, between all of us, there's probably about 13 different bargaining units, and they're represented by different organizations. So, again, we're looking forward to trying to put this in place. It doesn't appear that we'll be able to put this in place for the budget that you're going to make recommendations on next week, but we do think there's a compelling public interest to do this, and we actually think that it's worth pursuing. So, and like I said, Jamie and I are working on it from the town side. We're meeting with Hamlet and his staff. I don't know, Hamlet, you want to add anything about where you are with the board? Or?
Well, I think you've captured it, Jim. I mean, essentially, the concept, I think there is a compelling rationale to move forward, and as such, we've started to engage with our collective bargaining units around this, and I think the close collaboration that we have with the town, it's the orchestration of this and the timing of this and the sequencing of this. I would have liked to have been able to turn a switch, but the reality is we can't. And there are some real significant things that we need to accomplish, and I think Jim very captured them very, very accurately.
So this plan is administered through the state of Connecticut, and it would offer similar and comparative benefits to what we're providing through our self-insurance fund.
Yeah, we think they're comparative at a first analysis, and you know, the type of analysis that our consultants working with us did is they basically, the first thing they want to do is see, you know, how much disruption is there. So in other words, if I'm going to a dentist, or actually dental would be separate. Let's say I'm going to a GI doctor. Is my GI doctor in the partnership network? So what they did is they looked at our claims. They went back a year. You know, it was only 12 months, and they basically worked with the folks at the state controller's office who administer the partnership plan, and said, okay, how many matches do we have? So if my GI doctor is this provider number, does that match the provider number in the Oxford Partnership Network? And they found that in looking at this, the match rates were north of 90%. So that was deemed to be a positive. The other thing they looked at is, and again, this was something that you learn going through this, is they looked at it. They looked at the actuarial value of each medical plan, and the closer you are to one, the better the plan is. So a richer plan would have, say a number of 95, and a good but less rich plan would say be an 85. And they actually looked at that as well. That's just a value of the plan. That doesn't include, you know, premium shares. Okay, so in other words, if you got a 10% of that or a 15%, it doesn't include that. It's just a plan itself. And in those cases, the partnership plan on its own was better, and then there's a compliant piece because the partnership plan requires certain types of, wellness isn't quite the right word, but they talked about compliant and non-compliant elements to it. So in that regard, it looks like it's worth pursuing. And one of the caveats is when you go into it, basically, there's penalties to get out. Our consultants can explain it better than I can, but generally you're making a 3-year commitment. The folks that have made the switch, again, have saved money. You're selecting against the pool. I think based on a sheet I saw, the pool had close to 12,000 lives in it, which is more than what we have. Some larger communities have gone into it recently. City of Norwalk, Town and Board of Ed recently went into it. Now, we also have, on the surface of it, somebody could be watching this and say, well, doesn't the state have a lot of problems? And this is kind of a separate pool. But one of the things too is, and this is where it's important, I think, also from our finance board, is going from a self-insured program to something like this, because the pool is a self-insurance pool, but to us it's like the insurer. I think a good analogy for this is really the relationship between, say, Blackstone Library and the town. So Blackstone is part of our insurance program, they're part of our pool, but they're paying the allocated rate, and that was why they did a transfer during the past year. In effect, we would be eaten by a bigger fish. So now we're in a state pool, and they're allocating the rate to us. So we're not able to determine our rates anymore. Okay, not that we don't determine the rates, but we determine the funding. But we would then totally be subject to the state's allocated rate, just as Blackstone is in their situation. Right. That's something to think about. But part of the overall planning with this is I can't stress that dental piece enough, but that keeps our self-insurance fund alive. And probably a good analogy is like a pilot light on your stove. You may not use that burner to cook anymore, but if you had to, you could turn it up and the heat's going to come back on. So we can keep the self-insurance fund open, albeit at a lower level, and then use that to offset some of the OPEB liabilities and get the actuarial benefit of that. So we're getting a benefit of, eventually OPEB will come down too, but let's just say like the pension, we're getting 6.5% actuarial benefit on that. That has some positive aspects of our budget, because then again, those contributions will go down, our funded ratio will go up. We'll probably be, instead of the top 5, probably second in the state in terms of a funded ratio. And obviously, as we're going to borrow money for the schools and the community house and other things, we're going to be having conversations with the rating agencies about, how are we managing our debt, how are we managing our liabilities. So I think that would also be a positive. So I think generally speaking, there's a lot of positives to this. However, like I said, it's not as easy as flipping a switch, and we do anticipate now some initial pushback from the bargaining units, which means we have to do a good job in terms of explaining the program and the benefits to them. But that's going to take more time than I thought.
So you will be updating us periodically on this, and maybe there's something we can incorporate into next year's budget. That's kind of where you're at.
Yeah, I would think certainly for next year. I mean, our goal is to get those memorandums of agreement in place, and I think there's probably about 13 bargaining units between us, and again, they all have different takes on it. I mean, if you think of the different groups, you have teachers, you have police, fire. And ironically, there's another plan on the horizon that's only open to firefighters. So that's another option out there. So.
Charlie, you got a question?
Is this a state of Connecticut plan, is this like an Aetna plan or an Oxford plan?
Oxford. It's an Oxford network, yeah.
So the state must have a group of physicians who are enrolled in their plan and labs and hospitals and so forth?
Well, the Oxford network and the Anthem network, I would guess, must be very similar in terms of their participants, because remember I said that matching rate was north of 90%.
I was going to say, because I've gone through, Aetna, Oxford, Connecticut, and so forth. I'll tell you, the biggest hurdle is to make sure the physicians, your current employees, can keep their position.
Right.
That's a huge hurdle.
That's why we did that disruption analysis. Yeah.
And I think it was actually closer to 95%.
Yeah.
I mean, just to follow up on Jim's comment about potential pushback, we feel from our analysis to date, and we're doing some more, obviously, with our consultant, we feel that this is there's benefits to the town, and when I say town, I mean direct benefits to the taxpayers of this town, but we also feel that this is a comparable plan, at least for our employees as well. So, going forward, we would like to just flip that switch, but I think, it would take some time to go through. As Jim mentioned, we must have at least 13 bargaining units that we need to meet with and go over this plan with them. And that would take some time. We would like to have implemented this budget year. When we started to go through it, we say, well, it may take a little bit more time than we initially anticipated. However, we thought it was, still worthwhile to come before this board to mention it and bring you up to date what we've been working on, and in the near future come back.
I have one more thing, I just want to throw it out. Jimmy, you mentioned you'd be locked in for 3 years?
Well, the state wants a 3-year commitment. There are ways, there are escape clauses, as I understand.
Hypothetically, supposing they have a group, say pro-health physicians in their group, and after the first year they back out, people join believing their physician in pro-health was going to be covered. Now he's not in there. And so what happens?
Well, I mean, I think to some extent that scenario exists today. I mean, if my GI person drops out of Anthem's network, well,
you'll find another doctor.
Yeah.
This is the groups now,
Well, yes, I mean,
No,
it's a hypothetical. I mean,
just
it
look
could,
ahead.
it could happen.
Are these stumbling blocks? That's all.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that why we're committed to this is, and the three of us and Hamlet staff have talked about this, is, if you're looking at this and you see the benefits, and we know that, let's just use a simple model, if everybody paid 15% of all the costs, then obviously the employees would get 15% of the benefits, the town would get 85% of the benefits. But the question is, and it relates to the presentation before you, if we want to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money, then realistically it compels us to try to make this happen. And if we do that, we can set ourselves up to do things even better, improve our performance in other areas. I mentioned the debt, I mentioned OPEB. So that's taking advantage of those conditions to sort of reinvest back in the town, right, in some way. So, and again, no one really gets hurt. That's not our intention. I mean, obviously, when they look at things, it's looking at a group. That doesn't mean every single person is gonna benefit, but most of the people will. So I think that's another aspect of this that which is kind of pushing us forward. I mean, it'd be easy to say no, and and then just go on as if things are the same as they are. But again, as if we have an opportunity to select against the state, we should do that. We've also looked at, I should also add that we've also looked at, the consultants have done it, I've done it. Well, okay, so what if the pricing is different than what we would budget, and how much of a difference would it have to be? And And it would take a while for us, for the savings to go away. And, you know, and if you do save money and then say you adjust your taxes or it goes somewhere else, you still get that future value of that savings going forward. We were talking about the trash earlier. Bob, you mentioned about the new contract. Well, realistically, as it relates to the collection contract, essentially that's what you did. You got a very, very low bid, which was 5 years, and now, as Paul Muniz, who was here earlier, said, you know, if you future value that out to where you are today, you're pretty much where you would have been. Well, we got the future benefit of those savings over the time. So, you know, again, and it doesn't impact programs. It doesn't impact the way, you know, the services.
So Jim, how do you handle the remaining fund balance?
How do you hit, you're talking about the self-insurance fund now? Well, one of the things, I mean, you could do it a couple different ways. And again, I'm just laying out a concept.
I understand.
I want to reserve the right to change this idea, okay? But basically...
Raise your right hand.
Yeah. I think you could kind of reverse engineer it in a way. If you say, okay, what sort of funded ratio do you want to be in terms of OPEB? And then you say, well, let's say it's 75%. Well, how much money is that? And then how much money is left in the self-insurance fund? That amount is going to be sufficient, clearly, to cover dental costs. But in a way, you want to have some money kind of keeping your powder dry, if you will, or the pilot light example, so in case you decide to get out of that partnership program or go to another program. Because then if you didn't do that, then you'd have to start, you know, building up your reserve corridor again. So then you'd say, well, I've got to budget 120% of claims in a worst case scenario because you need the 20% to cover your reserve corridors. So so somewhere in between those numbers, you know, so try to get to 75% of the OPEB, I think would be a very reasonable number, and it would also have, you know, some savings in terms of what our contributions are. So that's kind of, you know, the way we've kind of modeled that. But again, it's contingent upon all these other things happening. We did get assurances from our auditors that the dental piece being separate would comply with the GASB 54. As you know, the partner we have is, you know, every year that goes by is one less year we'll probably have him because he's talking about retiring. He's working part-time, but he keeps our account. He said to me that, you know, he's also talked to the partner that will eventually take Branford over, so that we're clear in that understanding. So that's a good thing. I mean, now, obviously, maybe that's a good thing too, because they want to get reappointed, right? So it kind of makes sense. But I mean, I'm just being candid with you. So,
all right.
So I mean, there is a plan that kind of goes with this. It could do some good things for us. It could do some good things for the employees. I think in terms of negotiation going forward, you know, if you're operating with one plan, kind of makes it a little bit simpler. Now you're really talking about premium shares. I'm sure Catherine's not going to miss trying to reconcile the trial balance on the self-insurance fund.
A lot of benefits.
I mean, there are some other benefits.
A lot of win-win.
Yeah.
All right, so to be continued on that, but it looks like there's a good opportunity there, and as Jim pointed out, it's really, we have kind of a responsibility to look at it in depth and try to move in that direction, as there's some really good short-term and long-term benefits. Thank you for all of you for that, for the research, and also good luck on moving forward with it. I think you're off the hook, Hamlet.
Okay.
If you want to sit around for debts or for the debt plan, you're welcome to. But Jim, you wanted to talk about the debt and Blackstone and potential of.
Yeah, I basically I kind of touched upon this when we talked about the you know, the partnership plan, but that would basically allow us to you know, kind of. Like let's say, for example, if we were to do this in the current year and get some savings, and we could talk about increasing the debt service budget to sort of move closer to the $10 million number. So that would have presented an opportunity. You know, the fact that, like I said, we can't turn the switch and we can't make this happen in July, not going to happen, but it kind of shows you that in a future year, that's something we could look at.
Residual benefits.
Yeah, and obviously that's something that, you know, you certainly reserve the right in a future year's appropriation. The other thing totally unrelated to this is the police pension. And when we talked about changing the actuarial assumptions, dropping the rate of return on assets to 6.5%, for actually also then trying to offset that a little bit by amortizing it over 20 years. You know, you can see the difference to go from, you know, we would go from, currently we're doing 911,000, not on this sheet, but we go to $1,056,60, just on a defined benefit plan. Now remember, if you tie it back to that number, Charlie, it's going to have the defined contribution plan also in it, but just for the defined benefit plan.
Right.
And so if we could basically lower that by about $81,000, and then our funded ratio, you know, we're just hovering at 70%, or at least put us in a little bit of a north of 70% at 73.4. You save $81,000 over 20 years. That's like $1.6 million. You know, that's the benefit of doing that.
So this would be something that we would consider next week in order to put in this current year's budget.
Yes.
In order to move money out of debt service, I assume.
Actually, that would
come out of the other pension.
It would lower the pension cost.
Lower the pension piece, and that way we would be able to actually then have an $81,000 reduction in next year's budget with regards to that contribution that Jim has shown. Because that $1,056,000 is now what's in the proposed budget. If we were to move $1 million into the police pension, it would knock that contribution down to $975.
Yeah, and again, you know, we talked about what to do with that TRB piece that wasn't going into the TRB fund. And, you know, or probably just a little early, we were talking about, you know, probably making that decision in the fourth quarter of the year. Or April is pretty close, so it might be a little early, but, you know, it's, you know, so it's something that, you know, we would use to reduce a liability, so.
Okay. Questions on Jim's discussion? We've had a pretty good discussion. So, for now, appreciate it, Jim. Thank you. Thanks, Jamie. And thanks to Lisa and Catherine and the board. And with no other business to come before our board tonight, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion to move, and seconded by Victor. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Now we'll adjourn. Thank you.
The preceding program was brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.